Hello, one, hello, all. My name is CP. This is the 16th episode of Will I Like It Interviews. My next guest is somebody, if you've watched this channel at all in the last 8 months, you know I've sung this movie's praise quite a bit. He's the director. I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your name. Is it Vincente?
Just Vincent.
Vincent.
Just Vincent.
Oh,
Yeah.
Vincent. It's Vincent DiSanti, director of Friday the 13th fan film Never Hike Alone. Vincent, thank you for being here.
No problem. It's great to be here, CP.
So first question. So this is a fan film that, for people that don't know, this is there's no profit to be made from this, correct?
That is correct.
This is just...
Nope. You don't make fan films for money. You make them for passion.
Okay. So when did the idea start for you?
Man, it's funny. It's such a funny question because my entire life, since I knew that I wanted to work in film, I wanted to work on a Friday the 13th film. And I think that it was at some point, I moved out to LA in like 2008. And I want to say somewhere around 2013, I kind of got the notion in the back of my head that you're probably never going to work on a Friday the 13th film in your current path. I was working in feature animation and my career was taking me in different ways. And I just said, you know what would be fun? Just building a cool cosplay costume, going out, filming a 5-minute short. And that's how I'll get my Friday the 13th fix. Mm-hmm. And I think that over time, what ended up happening is, you know, I'd make a costume and be like, oh, you know, this could be a little bit better. And I'd write a script and say, oh, this could be a little bit better. And it slowly started to build over time. And eventually ended up discovering a set of cabins up in Big Bear that I thought would be a good place to shoot at. You know, started discovering different locations and slowly started to put together this project. And it took probably, I don't know, 2 years before I really had an idea of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to execute it, trying to figure that out in between, you know, the jobs that I had and all that stuff and finding a weekend to go shoot. And I would say, yeah, I mean, it started a long time ago and it didn't really take shape. And I'd say until early 2016.
So, how did you present? This was crowdfunded, correct?
That's correct.
So how did you present the idea to? I'm assuming GoFundMe, something like that, right?
You can just do. I mean, when it comes to Kickstarter and Indiegogo, you can just approach and do whatever you want. You don't need anyone's permission to start a crowdfunding campaign. I mean, obviously there were reservations from the standpoint of raising money for a fan film. Can you do it? What are the limitations and all those things? And going in, we did the research. You know, I looked up stuff like Zack Snar or whatever that was for Star Trek that raised $1.2 million and got sued out of their ass. And, you know, said, well, we can't do that. And looking up the rules, basically Paramount had drawn this line at about $50K for fan films. I went and looked up other fan films that got funded around that. Number. And I said, okay, well, we have a box we can play in and it's a pretty simple premise. I don't think we need that much money. Let's see what we can raise. But it really started with doing the first trailer that we released in May. Okay. So when we did that, we didn't know whether we were going to make a movie or not. We just knew we could make a really cool trailer with something that could get people's interest up. And if people were interested, we would take it to the next step. And if it just kind of fell on its face, we wouldn't spend the effort. And we got a great response. You know, I remember Friday the 13th franchise.com posted about it and shared it, and it hit a couple other places, and we would start getting messages about it. And it was during the filming of that trailer where we were tipped off to the abandoned camp. And so it was a process of getting a really good response from the trailer and then discovering the abandoned camp that we said, whoa, like here's our opportunity. And in order to do this right, we will have to crowdfund. Now let's go after it. And then it was a summer of preparation, crowdfunding in the fall. That failed. But through that, we got some private funding that people came on off of the Kickstarter saying, listen, I don't need to be a part of Kickstarter to help you on this project. Let's just go get this thing done. I used that to get the first half of the film made, then came back to Kickstarter in the following January when we were taking a break for winter because the entire camp was covered in snow, to then raise the final $20,000 to finish the film out through the spring and summer and release it later in October.
So did you have a script in place, or did you let the budget dictate what the script was? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think what ended up happening was we had a script in place that was very different from the one that you saw, executed on the day. And that was because we were writing to a very specific location, a location where we couldn't do interior shots. We were only going to be able to do exteriors. He was going to wander on the outside of the buildings. We couldn't get inside of the buildings because people lived in them, even though they looked completely abandoned. I mean, it's the creepiest place. And I still wish I could have used that location in the film somehow, but it just didn't fit. And it was very simple. I mean, he would go to, the interaction between him and Jason was much quicker. I mean, as soon as he's walking around the camp, as soon as he sits down to check his map and figure out where he is, he gets attacked and the chase ensues. And it was during the trip to that camp to film the cabins to film the trailer that somebody said, listen, like there's a camp up the road. You guys should go film up there. And I was like, I don't have money for a camp. I can't rent that place out. And he goes, no, it's abandoned. Nobody even knows it's there. It's like, you got to take this trail and you got to do this and do that. And it was like a horror film. I mean, it was just like, what are we going to do? And then we ended up going up to this camp. And when we ended up discovering it, that's when the script started to change, because we were like, oh, look at this, a door to nowhere. Hey, how much would it be to throw somebody out of that thing? Like if we have it, let's use it. Look at this room. Look at that room. Okay, now that we have these rooms and they're all blank canvases, what are we going to write that fits within these rooms? And so we started to talk about what each room could become. I started thinking about the original film and really just tying everything back to that, not worrying about too much about the continuity of the other films, which were all blown up in continuity anyway. It's not like it all fits together perfectly. So it was like, we don't have to worry about that. Let's just worry about the first film. And I started thinking about okay. And that's when I got the idea for the ribbons. It's like, let's rebuild the sets, or at least as close as we can, because it's obviously a different camp, to the original film. That way, as our character is going through Camp Crystal Lake, fans will feel like they're being brought on this trip down memory lane. It's not just, walking into a bedroom and panning a light across a bedpost that says Jason on it. It's actually like looking at things that like make fans go, oh, I remember that. Oh, I remember that. Oh, it's that thing. You know what I mean? And
there's that one scene where he's by the fireplace and you have what looks like the original Camp Crystal Lake sign, and that hit me. I was like, oh.
Yeah, and we wanted to like show what we wanted to do is, because you've seen the camp sign broken and thrown onto the side of the road. You've seen the small, white one, off to the side as well. But what I wanted to show was like, hey, look, these things were actually a part of something at one time. And let's show it how it would have been presented if they were trying to reopen the camp. So they took that same style of art and put it on the crest of the fireplace. It's just like the sign that hangs out front, but they painted it there. And the white sign is up on the wall somewhere. There's multiple ones. They're probably all around camp and stuff like that. So we wanted to repeat the design language so it felt like it was naturally a part of the camp. And that would also help fans feel like they were at the real Camp Crystal Lake, rather than something that didn't quite feel right. They didn't feel like they were actually getting to see the thing that they've always wanted to see. And that was part of the appeal of the film, was that we were taking a character, or we were taking, the audience on an experience of, imagine if you found Camp Crystal Lake and you got to walk through it. Like, what would that experience be like? And so that's really the first, once we get into the camp, that's like the first part of that experience, is like, we don't want to just get into the action. It's like, now that we have this opportunity to show off the camp, let's bring, folks on that journey, and we can tuck some scares in here and there, as we can, but we don't have to really focus on it, because people are just going to be so engrossed with what they're seeing. And that eventually we'll remind them that Jason is there, and that will be the next part of the fun. But let's show off what we've found first, and then get into the action. And that's when, the script expanded. We wrote all that stuff in the middle there. I mean, there was stuff that like continued to get written, like the bunk bed scene wasn't originally in there. It was an idea that I had because there was one room we weren't using, and I was like, man, I got to use this room for something. And, I was really starting to get a hang of like how we were going to do the red ribbon scenes. And there was a space in the film where I was like, ooh, right here, I can add another scene, but there's no bunk beds here. But then I started to like understand like what was at the camp. And so we ended up like cutting down a bunch of 4x4s of these things that were holding up signs at the camp, and building the bedposts and building the bunk beds from scratch and building that crime scene. Cause I would watch it myself and say like, man, what's missing? I really wish I had the Kevin Bacon kill in here. Like, how do I do that? And it was like kind of reverse engineering and figuring out, okay, it fits here. We can do that. Let's go off. And I would run off for a day up to camp, go build that set, and then we'd film it the following weekend. So there was stuff that was like we kind of built as we went, but the structure of it was mostly always there.
So the door to nowhere thing, that was a happy accident, because I gave you credit for see when that scene happened. I'm like, oh, this is an homage to part 3, the barn, and I don't know if you did that on purpose or it sounds that was.
Oh, definitely, and I think it's an homage to the entire. I think starting around 3. It's there is that, there's the scene where, they're pulling up the hay and they're loading stuff in the top, and that's how those doors are really supposed to work. But also from the standpoint of parts, starting at part 3 through 5, there's usually always some type, they started working in bigger and better stunts as the films went on. And one of them was a high fall. They would pull someone out of a window and they'd throw them off the top of a balcony and they'd fall. And so it was like, so it would be, And so it would be a cool callback to be like, oh, let's go do one of the high fall stunts. That's a Friday the 13th staple, somebody getting thrown off the second story of a building, but our guy will survive it. And, I think that was part of like one of the things we wanted to change about it was, 80s films or, older style films. There's like this tendency of like, stab, you're dead. And I think of a film like Blue Ruin where it's like stab. Okay. You bleed and it hurts.
Yeah.
And you don't die right away. You die slowly. And I wanted to take that aspect of it, is like, if Jason got his hands on you, he could injure you right away and he could wound you right away. But what happens if you don't die right away? That might be even scarier. And so that's the aspect we wanted to take of Jason and use that to turn the fear. Since we didn't have a body count, we had a tension experience. And so we wanted that tension experience to carry the film.
Were you using, you were using a bunch of, what I would assume were drone shots, and you had a really big scope of the forest. Was that on purpose to help the isolation feeling?
Totally. I mean, you hit it right on the head. The reason why we shot those drone shots was to make people feel like, okay, he's out in the middle of nowhere and he's all alone. And we wanted to show that he's just this one little guy in this vast environment. And, that was part of the opening sequence. We used a lot of drone shots there to open up the world and kind of show, thank you. And just kind of show off the world and show off our environment and the types of environments that, fans are going to see throughout the film. And then after that, we did reduce our number of drone shots because we didn't need them as often, but they were used for, transition shots, open it up, bring it back in, like stay tight with the character. Then as he's transitioning into the next scene, we can show him walking off into the, the unmarked trail and give it a little bit more scope and fly over the forest to show that time has passed and that there's still nothing out there. You don't see buildings, you don't see roads, and you don't see anything that's like within a distance that it's an easy, there's no easy escape. And that's a lot of what the first part of the film is setting up. And that's why it takes so long to get to Jason, is the fact that we first needed to set up that he has gone beyond the threshold and he is way out in the middle of nowhere. And there's no one out there who's going to rescue him. And he's going to have to fend for himself. And so that was the first part we needed to set up. And then once we set that up and we felt like that was, solidified, we could then have our fun with Jason and then start the cat and mouse game of going back through all the places that we set up and how they're going to affect the character as he's trying to escape.
You are Jason in this movie, correct?
Correct, for about 60% of it.
Okay, so how tall are you?
6'3".
Oh, okay. And how tall is the lead?
The lead is about 5'11".
Okay, so
there was
cheating at all?
What?
Were you cheating shots at all? Because there was a couple of times where it seemed like there was a maybe it was just the angle.
I mean, sometimes it was just maybe the stances that we were taking. Okay. We did want to, create that height difference. And I think in costume, I was probably about 6'5", because the silicone prosthetic gives me an extra inch and the boots were pretty thick. So they raised me up an inch. So they probably put me up around 6'5". Standing barefoot, I'm 6'3". And, so I think that was part of it, and just the overall shape and size of when the whole costume is on, it kind of like, it just makes you bigger for some reason. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. And the Foley work you did with the footsteps, I think helped a bit too. I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but there was an extra little.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I'm putting something into it that isn't.
No, I don't think anybody missed those footsteps.
The stumps. Yeah.
they were pretty out there. And it was something that I came up with towards the back end of production. Like, we wanted to differentiate between Kyle and Jason when they're moving. And one of the things I asked for, I was like, listen, when Jason's walking around and he's coming after, he's no longer in stealth mode. He's no longer slipping between the trees and doing what he needs to do to get out there. He's just coming full speed, and he's not trying to inhibit any type of sound. So I want to hear his impact on the ground. And it was something that, I think as a theory, it was really cool. And I think as an execution, a little bit of it got away from us because it needed more time. It was actually like we were kind of talking about before we got on, like the things you want, when you're going after something on a film, you want to make sure that not only can you execute it, but you have the time to execute it right. And we were kind of up against it at the end. And it was a theory that I think with a little bit more work, I think we would have got a little less slack from some of the people who were like, man, his footprints, his footsteps are so loud. It was like one of those things like, yeah, I think on a, when you listen to it on your phone, or if you listen to it on a set of computer speakers, it doesn't sound the same as when it's on a surround sound system or in a theater. And I mixed it for a theater because we were going for Telluride. And so I was mixing a theater mix because we were doing a live presentation, thinking, oh, that will just carry over to what we, put online, and that will be fun. And when we did that, and you compress it all down and you lose some of that quality, some of that low end that evened out the sound kind of disappeared. And if you're on a big budget film, when you do your exports, you're getting theatrical export, you're getting a Blu-ray export, you're getting a YouTube export, you're getting a cell phone export, and you're doing mixes for each of those things. And we only did one mix, and we did a theater mix. So it was something that I learned. And if I had, if I had the chance to go back and do it again, I would probably just dial it down a little bit so it's a little bit mixed in. I wouldn't change the fact that Jason's footsteps are heavy, that when he's coming, he's got a different sound, and that there is this impending doom with his feet coming from off screen. You can hear him coming from a little bit away because he's pissed off. There's something to build at. It lets you know that, like, the villain is on the way. We need to do something, especially in the scene after he trips and goes down. We want to hear Jason coming because he knows he only has a few minutes before Jason arrives on that trail. And if he's not off the trail, he's dead. And we needed
those. You got slack for that, really?
Yeah, I mean, I understand it. Like, it's, you sit back and you watch your films, and nobody judges the film harder than I do. I sit, like, when we were going after the Blu-ray, I was talking to my team, and I was like, yeah, so when we get this, like, money from the Blu-ray, I'm thinking about going back in and changing this and that, and, like, basically George Lucasing it. And like, get your hands off the film. You're done. Like,
I want to put Pamela in the final scene.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, like, maybe we'll get, like, the CD hologram Pamela that pops up. Yeah, because you want to go in and films are never finished. They kind of just get done. To a director, they'll sit there and want to tweak until the day is long, and they'll never stop. And I would have never stopped. If I had the ability, I would have worked 24 hours a day on that thing. And I did, for the most part. I mean, I was, towards the end, I was driving off to composing sessions and sound mix sessions and editing in my house with my wife, and it was a complete process all the way in towards the end, and we were completely engrossed. And, even when it was done, I was still like, man, there's still stuff I wish I could have done. There's still stuff I wish I could, like, go in and, like, kind of tweak. But at the same time, I do have to sit back and say, listen, like, it's doing pretty well for itself. And I think that, for all the tweaks that I could do, I don't think anyone would notice them as much as I do. And, if somebody wants to get mad at me because the footsteps are too loud, then I'll wear that hat and say, hey, you know what, next time I'll mix them better. But until then, watch it on a surround sound system instead of your phone.
Yeah, no, it's probably I mean, I haven't, these are pretty good headphones that I watched that on the YouTube page.
Or good headphones too, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, I would argue at least that it's probably the best experience for a Friday the 13th movie, period. I mean, you said you shot in 6 to 8K. You were going back and forth between that.
Yeah, we jumped back and forth. Like, kind of talked about it before, but we started shooting with a Sony A7S II, which shoots 4K, and we were able to export out to a digital monitor that recorded in 4K. And so we always were working with 4K footage. And along the way, we were lucky enough to meet two cameramen by the name of Evan Butka and Ben Meredith, who were kind enough to bring their Red Epic and Panasonic Vericam, which shoot between 4.7 and 8K. And, it's not that we're out there just saying that, like, all right, we're going to shoot an 8K film for YouTube. Yeah. There's no way you're releasing an 8K film on the internet. But what the larger scale format does for you is the ability to adjust your frame. So if something was just a little bit too wide, I could punch in. Or if I wanted to put a digital zoom, I could zoom in without losing quality. And that's where the extra resolution came in super handy. Yeah, and we were able to do a 4K export of the film that we're now able to take to theaters and screen when we do our screenings with our hard drive. So that helps. I mean, that's kind of a cool part of the experience. But for us as filmmakers, it allows you an extra little wiggle room when you're framing stuff up that you don't have when you only shoot in 1080. And I've run into issues like that where I frame something wrong in 1080 and I don't really have the ability to jump out of it. 4 and 8K kind of give you a little bit more wiggle room to really lock in the final composition that you want.
So the budget was how much? I'll let you say that.
All in, it was about 40 and change. We raised 20 grand in the fall, and then we raised another 20 grand in the spring. I mean, in the winter and for shooting in the spring. So it was 20 and 20. And then there was some private money that we threw in towards the end for some extra bits. Like I ended up paying myself for the face. I was like, you know what? I really want this. Like, how can we do it that won't break my bank? And we had to come up with a kind of a cost-effective way of doing a face reveal. Yeah,
that's
like that.
Let me segue into that. Knowing how you were treating and paying homage to the history of Friday the 13th, there is a face reveal that what part of the lineage did you use for inspiration? Because it doesn't really look like any one particular film.
No, I mean, I think it came down to two things. First of all, I was using a hood from CFX that looks a very specific way. The costume in general, I thought, we did a really good job as far as finding things that you can buy off the shelf and put them together to complete a good looking Jason. I think that we achieved that goal. And the way that we stepped out in front of just getting things you can buy off the shelf is we went and we designed our own hockey mask. And the hockey mask is what differentiates it from somebody else who's going to go out and do it, because anybody can buy the CFX hood, anybody can buy the CFX hands, anybody can buy, a military style jacket and a Henley that they can blood up and pants and stuff like that. It was, differentiating our Jason with the use of that mask. And then underneath, we needed something that then fit into our kind of stock hood. Because if I was going to design it from scratch, I would have done more like, part 6 with like the mangled skin and stuff like that. But we didn't have the budget to go out and do that. And we needed something I could wear over a long period of time. And CFX offered that hood, which is like, anybody who's out there cosplaying, I would recommend their stuff in a heartbeat. I was able to wear that hood over and over and over and over again for the process of about a year of filming this film. And so what we ended up doing was, instead of coming up with a complete facial design, because we didn't have 4 hours to just sit around and put me in makeup, we ended up doing a thing where they molded my head in the cowl, and we designed something that fit into the hole in my face and then seamed in. And the only thing I held Kelsey to, who was a VFX artist, was like, we just need to make sure the damage is correct. So let's make sure the axe wound is there. Let's make sure the machete wound is there. And let's make sure the wound from the propeller is on the jaw. And so from there, we kind of did it so it would make sure that it matched what was there. And we talked about like where I thought Jason would have gone. He's a 70-year-old undead walking corpse. So this thing doesn't have eyes anymore. This thing is rotting out. And we really wanted to go into that, decomposed look. And I think that that's where we wanted to take it. We didn't want to try and make him feel like there was like working fleshy bits there. Like we wanted him to feel dry and old and mummy-like. And we ended up taking a bunch of reference from a bunch of different sources. We looked at the damage reference, but then we looked at like what it would take to be more mummy-like. And I built kind of this, in Photoshop, I built like this composite of what it should look like. And then Kelsey kind of ran with it from there. A lot of the way that it will look is also it's molding to my face. So it's going to have some of my features. And that's why it's going to look a little bit different. Like when Kane is in, costume and he has all his face reveals, a lot of that makeup, when you start to like break it down and look at it, you're like, oh yeah, it looks like Kane. Like I can see Kane's facial features within that makeup, or, CJ, or if you go back and look at Ted White and Richard Brooker, like if you understand what their faces look like and you understand how the makeup sits on their face, you understand how much their actual like physical attributes lead into the way that Jason looks. Same thing with Warrington Gillette. And I think that played a little bit of a part into it, but we definitely wanted to go into the decomposed, aging, walking undead being that went there. We wanted that angle, and that was kind of all I really held her to.
How much of the budget went to effects, and how much went to actors?
Actors, nothing. All the actors volunteered their time.
All the actors volunteered their time?
Yeah. The only thing we ever had to do was feed them and buy all their costumes and put them up in Airbnbs when we filmed. And most of the actors just stayed with us. For Tom, we put him up in his own Airbnb because we brought his whole family out. And we're like, you know what? You're doing this as a big favor to us. We're going to put you up in a nice Airbnb and take care of you and feed you all weekend. And you only have to film one night. We won't take your entire weekend. And that way you kind of get like a vacation out of this. So that went to that. Most of the budget probably went towards stunts and effects. So stunts are that.
That's hysterical.
Well, everybody just, everyone was a personal friend. Other than Tom, everyone was a personal friend who just wanted to be in the film. Andrew and I were kind of partners in it because he was one of the first people in. He was, he's a good friend of mine. We worked on a film together before, and been, hanging out and stuff like that and talking about this project for a while. And he knew that this was a good opportunity for him to actually take the lead in something and have a say in it. Have a say in the character and have a say, in the things that were going to happen to him and how he was going to do that and push himself as an actor with the things that he was going to have to do. I mean, we really gave him all the range of emotions, maybe except for love in this film. He never falls in love with Jason, so never went that far. But, from there, and so that allowed us, because everyone understood that. And a lot of, and the people who we did have to hire from a crew standpoint also took major cuts in what they were charging us. And the deal was, it's like, listen, I would rather pay for you to use that cool thing you've always wanted to use rather than just giving you the money.
Right.
You can either take this money and film with lesser equipment, or I can buy you that thing that you want to film with, and we can film with that. And I can go get the tools and the toys that you want to play with, and this becomes your ability to finally play with those things that you usually don't get to play with. And that was the deal. And that was the deal for all of us, because, obviously wasn't taking any money, and I was doing the most work. And I think that everyone saw that I was putting the effort, and I was, killing myself to make this film, that they were like, you know what, if he's willing to go, stand out there for 16 hours or drive up to the camp in 100-degree heat and build stuff when we're not even here, then we'll put in a little bit of an extra. And I think everybody jumped onto that kind of mentality and just wanted to be a part of the project.
So you said the name, so I'll just say the name that you said. Did it take anything convincing? Like, how did you get Tom involved? Was there
it started with our EP, actually, Barry J. So Barry J was a Kickstarter backer in the October Kickstarter. And that didn't go through. And Barry lives in town, and I went and I met with him because he went at like the top tier. And I was like, Barry, like, if you're into this project and you believe in it, would you just become an EP and help us do this? And whatever you put in, I'll match it. And he was like, let's do it. And so we worked together in the first half, and I would go to Barry's and I would update him and show him footage and all that stuff. And somewhere along the line, one day he was just like, hey, Vin, I met these people and we're working on this deal. And, as a birthday present to me, they actually got me a dinner with Tom Matthews. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, they're friends with him. And, they told him how much of a big Friday the 13th fan I was. So they're setting up a dinner for, where I'm going to meet him and his wife, and we're going to go out and we're just going to have a nice kind of get together. And it was sometime in December or, November or December, after we had already filmed the first half of the film. And I was like, that's awesome. I'm like, have fun. And so during the dinner, Barry brings up that he's EPing Never Hike Alone and says, you should watch the trailer. And he shows Tom our first trailer. And Tom was like, wow, like, this is a fan film? Like, this doesn't look like a fan film. And Barry, to his credit, at that moment said, if we put the right pieces together, would you want a cameo? And he said, I'll think about it. And so Barry told me that. And then he set up a meeting about 2 weeks later. I met Tom for lunch, and Barry was there too. And we just sat down and I talked to to Tom about what I saw for this film, what I saw for the franchise, what I saw for his character. I showed him our second trailer, which was much more in depth and had some of our stunts in it, and was a little bit more intricate, kind of showed the world. And then we talked about the end scene, and the ambulance driver was always supposed to show up. It was going to be more of a jump scare than it was going to be kind of a big, like, blow your mind cameo reveal. And when I said, listen, like, Tom, I've been thinking about it, and if you were this character and you open those doors, fans are going to lose it. Like, that's going to be such a big surprise for them. They're never going to see it coming, because I'm not going to tell anybody you're a part of this. You know, I'll give you, like, I was, you know, not saying this, but I was like, I'll give you an out. Like, if I end up writing a script that you don't like, if I end up not being able to put it together or whatever happens, I'm not going to beholden this to you, and I'm not going to put this pressure on you. I just want you to say yes. And if you do, I will do everything in my power to get you on set and give you the experience that you want. And then we're not going to tell anybody. We're going to let the surprise kind of be the big thing. And, like, that's the point of it. It's that, you know, we don't want to give everything away. We don't want to, you know, use your name to raise money. That's not why I'm doing this. Like, we want it to be an extra surprise for the people who believe in this project and the people who stuck it out with it. And he believed in it. And so it was, you know, probably about 2 to 3 months of going back and forth on that scene, because the scene used to be much shorter.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It used to be much, much shorter. And, basically they just drove away at the end. I mean, it was just like, yeah, he just wakes up, says he's still out there, and drives away. And then the person would scare them, and that would kind of be it, because it was one of those things we were thinking about what the budget that we had and what we could and couldn't do. We knew that Jason was still out there, and we knew that he had barely survived. But we were going to play the story that continued afterward in a much different light, where he's having kind of what he has in the end of the film. We started working some ideas that we had for the kind of next sequences into the film, of him seeing Jason, him being haunted just like Tommy. And, like, even though he survived the night, he was cursed, and that curse was going to follow him until the end of the time, until he came back and faced it again. And that was going to be kind of the story of Never Hike Alone 2. And during that, we were going to be like, hey, if this is good enough, maybe we'll be able to go find a Tom, or we'll be able to go find characters from the past and bring them into it. But now, having Tom in it, we didn't have to do that journey. And I was able to take some of that stuff and put it into that scene and say, like, all right, we can understand that he's already cursed. We can understand that, you know, this isn't over yet. And we can now play it to the point where we've discovered our, you know, our canon character, and that this story is about to open up into a whole new world. And so the ending changed from this thing of what could be in one standpoint, and was like, what could be from, what if we reopen the franchise back where we kind of left it off in the 80s. And we didn't worry about the stuff that happened in between now and then, but it was like, yeah, imagine that, you know, they did all this stuff. Some of the stuff at the end happened, but then Jason disappeared for 30 years. And then, you know, you have a character like Tom, who's, you know, sitting there like a crazy Ralph in a certain way. He's a paramedic, always thinking like, you know, this thing's coming back, guys. And everyone going, what are you talking about? Like, we haven't seen him in 30 years. He's gone. He's dead. You defeated him. We defeated him. He's gone. And him going, I don't know what it is, but he's still cursed. He's still seeing Jason. He's still dealing with his shit. Then on top of that, while he's trying to tell everybody about this stuff, and 30 years have gone on, and he's even partially given up, finally somebody goes in and wakes the beast, and that's Kyle. And so that's kind of where we want to take Never Hike Alone 2, is tell Never Hike Alone from Tom's perspective, and show it from that side of how he's led into the moment where he meets Kyle, and then what's going to happen in the moments afterwards, setting up the world as Camp Crystal Lake as it is today as a town. Well, not Camp Crystal Lake, but Crystal Lake as a town. And then how is existing today, what the fear is, and then having Andrew as a character go in and unlock, you know, and unleash the beast from its hiding place, and then setting the whole world on its head.
You should have it still be called Forest Green, just for or have some sort of reference to Forest Green. Just
we have anybody who bought the script, there's a cool little Easter egg at the end of the script.
Okay.
That kind of, because I knew I was kind of shitting all over Forest Green, and it's like it goes back and forth, because it's Forest Green in part 6, but then it's Crystal Lake in part 7 and part 8. And I was like, well, at some point they changed the name, so let's find a cool way to kind of work this into like in an official capacity. So I did a little special thing for guys who, you know, anyone who has the script, either digital or hard copy. On the last pages, there's a cool little Easter egg that
That's
I
awesome.
think people are going to dig, that kind of tips off what we're thinking about doing with Never Hike Alone 2.
So there's a definite an open door to carrying on that story then.
Oh, totally. I mean, once Tom was involved, and once we figured out that ending where he'd be driving off and Jason would be chasing them in, there is a ton of motivation that's already set up in Never Hike Alone. That's not necessarily, there's no light shining on it, but all of those, there are elements in Never Hike Alone that directly play into how the events of Never Hike Alone 2 play out. There's things that are set up. There's a very specific reason why Jason attacked Kyle at a very specific moment. There are certain things about the aspect of the curse that Tommy will know, that Kyle won't know, that when they put their two minds together, they will come to an understanding about something. And I think for fans, they've always wanted some type of explanation. And I think that the pursuit of that explanation has led to some convoluted theories. And this theory is so simple, even though it's supernatural, it kind of makes a ton of sense. It's like, you know what? Like, why are we trying to logic out, like, did he drown? Did he not drown? He did drown, but then he didn't drown and he survived, and he just said, fuck mom, I'm just going to live in the woods. Like, I'm not coming back. Like, why would he ever do that? But if it's much easier to say that, he loved his mother so much and his mother loved him so much that when he died, he couldn't pass on, and his body and his soul stayed at the bottom of that lake, yearning for her, and ended up haunting his mom and driving her nuts, until the fact that she went and killed people. And by the time she died, and her craziness was so crazy that when she died, he loved her so much he came back from the dead to avenge her death. And that's a curse. And curses are a lot of fun to play with because you don't have to adhere to the bounds of reality. You have to play within the bounds of supernatural reality. And with a character like Jason who doesn't die, that just, opens up the door for you. One of my big, critiques of 2009 was that, they set him up so much to be human that when they started sticking machetes through his heart and sticking his head in a wood chipper, I was like, well, how do you bring this character back? You're falling back on the faulty logic of the earlier films, which this, ultimately is silly. It's like, why are you going for the silly when you could rewrite this in a way that feels like it should naturally progress, and the audience won't groan when he comes back? They'll go, oh no, we understand why he's coming back and that nothing is going to stop him. Like in part 6, when Sheriff Garris is shooting him with a shotgun and he's just sitting back up and he keeps coming, that's the character I want to see. I don't want to see a character that should die when he gets shot get back up, because then I go, oh, now I'm taken out. And I think that a majority of audiences are taken out, except for the, hardcore Friday fans. And it's like, no, give something that everybody can enjoy, because Friday the fans have cheered on an undead Jason. So let's bring him back. Why are we trying so hard to bring back human Jason when we've shown how flawed the story logic in those films are? Let's work within the story logic that we know works and fits the timeline, but also, not dismiss those 3 films, but just say it as like, I think the people of Crystal Lake just didn't know what he was. And so they have all their explanations and they're all wrong, but they're not entirely right. I mean, he did come back. He did have very human, fleshy looking skin, and he looked pretty brand new, but over time that decomposed. And the more damage he took, the uglier he got. And it's starting to reveal underneath what he really is, that, he really is still that corpse. He really still is all that stuff. And just what is on top is just that, what is it for the Terminator? That living exoskeleton.
Exoskeleton. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the living tissue on top of an exoskeleton. That's the way I kind of see Jason. He's just this, getting really nerdy about it. To me, he is the envisionment of what his mother thought he was going to grow up to be. When he, that part 2, part 3 look is what Pamela thought he was going to grow up to look like as an adult. And that's what he became. That's part of what the curse made him. And that kind of illusion is slowly getting pulled back over time. And that's what we see over the first, 2 through 8 is that slow peeling back of what's really underneath and what he really is. And that's why he keeps coming back. He may seem human, he may look human, but this entire time he has been supernatural. And that's why he survived a machete through his heart. That's why he survived an axe through his head. That's why he got up after, getting a machete through his face and spending 10 years underground. It's like, there's something beating within him that cannot be killed, that cannot be explained. And, that's kind of Tommy's mission, is what is keeping him going, and how do you stop this curse? How do you break the curse? And I think that if you focus a film on how to stop the curse rather than how to explain why he is the way he is, it kind of simplifies the goal and gives your character something to fight for that everyone can understand.
And how long did it take you to come to this conclusion? Because I got to be honest with you, I'm married, but if I wasn't, I'd probably propose to you right now. You've basically been singing me a love song for the last 10 minutes. Like, how long did it take you to come to this conclusion? Because it's incredible.
A long time. I mean, this is a long time of thinking about this franchise and where it goes. This is being a fan, as a young age, and watching the films out of order at first and being completely confused, and then making a point to watch them in order and go, wait, now I'm even more confused. And then go online, through my teens and my early 20s and argue with people about what it is. And, I was on camp He Survived the Drowning for a long time.
Because that's where you were talking about. I was on the opposite side of what you were talking about. My thing was just, I always said all they had to do was just say he never drowned. Like she was crazy, he never drowned. That was the one thing that I thought could have fixed the whole lineage. But now hearing the way you describe the what was the word you used? Not spirit. You just said it.
Oh, the curse.
The curse. Yes.
So,
like that makes sense too. Like what shit.
Yeah, I think what ended up happening was I was actually writing a Friday the 13th script that really went into depth of what happened to Jason after the accident and where he went. And I found myself completely bored. I was like, man, I don't want to see any of this stuff. None of this stuff makes sense. And it's really convoluted and it's really convenient. And ultimately, I kept going back to this notion of why would Jason spend any moment away from his mother? It doesn't make any sense. And the more I started to think about the character is when I started to come to this conclusion of no, it's more powerful if they love each other so much that they're coming from beyond the grave to haunt each other. It's that seems more powerful from a cinematic standpoint. And what got me was when I started to think about their backstory. So you're thinking about 1942-ish, or was it 1946?
He drowned. It was 58.
7.
He
drowned at 57, killed in 58. So he was born in 48, or he was born in
49.
40.
Late 40s.
Well, he's 11, I think, when he dies.
All right.
But to think about who Pamela was, and this was also going back to a story that Betsy Palmer told in one of the behind the scenes interviews. They asked her about where she got the inspiration for Pamela. And she talked about saying that the way I saw it is that, she met a high school sweetheart. They fell in love. They ended up having sex. She had Jason. He denied it. And her life was forever changed. Because now in the 40s, when, everyone's super religious and everyone's super judgmental, here's this young, 17, 18-year-old girl with a young deformed child out of wedlock. She is an outcast. They're both outcasts. Nobody wants anything to do with them. The parents disown her. She goes on the road. She starts trying to find jobs everywhere she's got to work. She's got to bring this deformed little kid with her who's, she's waitressing. He's in the back in the kitchen, hanging out with her. If she's doing she's working at a department store, he's hanging out in the, in the employee lounge, freaking everybody out. And eventually him being bored and not wanting to be stuffed away in the back room, he's going to go out and sneak around. He's going to get in trouble. He's going to get them kicked out and they're going to move on. And I think that the more I thought about that story is all they had for all that time were each other. The only two people that were ever, that they could ever trust was each other. That's all they had. And she was his life. And if you come up with a story that breaks that mold, and if you come up with a story that says that he didn't drown, it's very tough for her to logic out where she goes after that, for the fact that, one, he doesn't just return and say, Mom, they almost let me drown, they're jerks, get them sued or whatever. I think it was just more powerful to see a woman haunted from beyond the grave by her son, being the way I see it is, in 1950 whatever, when they arrive at Camp Crystal Lake, and they meet a very different style of people, the Christies. They're a little bit more progressive. They're not as religious. They're, hey, you're welcome here, man. We're not going to judge you. You should come here. And then they're there and, they keep to themselves because they've got their guard up. And the whole time they're like, no, you got to let him play with the kids. You got to let him go out. You got to let him participate. You got to let him live a life. You got to let him be a boy. And they've asked her to now, distance herself from her child, to actually trust other people with her child. And what happens? He dies.
Mhm.
That's powerful. You got to let that resonate. And I think that like Victor Miller is right when he says that. He's like, if you say that it doesn't drown, then it just negates everything I did in the first movie. Like in the first movie, he drowned. And I was like, you know what? If that's what you say and that's what the canon is, then I'll play by those rules and I will bring it into a supernatural realm. And I will have a lot more fun playing with a supernatural character than I will with somebody who is just really tough. You
Mhm.
know, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's like
Right.
how like, and you have to think about it this way too. It's like when you make a Friday the 13th film, looking back on what we've learned, are you really going to make just one? Why don't you give yourself some legs? You know what I mean? Like, let this play out over 3 or 4 films. Let this go and create something where you can bring yourself to do crazier and crazier things to the character. Maybe not so much blow him up and turn him into a demon snake, but go into a place where like you want to see him be set on fire. You want to see him, you know, get run over by cars. You want to see him have all these things happen to him, but he gets back up and he keeps coming. And that to me is where I think Friday should go. That's the character I want to see. That's why I really loved David Bruckner and Nick Antosca's script, was that was the character it was. I mean, there's one point in that script where they're shoving a fire poker through his face. And, you know, 2 minutes later, he sits back up in the back of an ambulance and starts killing people with a bone saw. And that's the character I want to see. I want to see him unleashed. I want to see him at full power. I want to see a new version of the Part 6 Jason. I want to see a version of the Part 7 Jason in a better movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'm doing math here, and essentially Never Hike Alone is to me it sounds like it's spiritually Friday 6B.
Very much. It's an extension of that type of thinking. And in that movie, you know, Tommy says out loud, we have to return him to the place where he originally died. And Tom McLaughlin acknowledges that he died in the first one. And in part 2, when Paul tells his story, he says Jason's still out there. He never explicitly says that he survived the drowning. He just says, some say he's still out there. And it's kind of like this, you know, we assume that because he built a house and because he put a toilet in it, because he had food in there, that he was human and surviving all this time. But I take it from the standpoint of the reason why those things happen is Jason doesn't know what he is. Jason doesn't know why he is. He's just as confused as the rest of us, you know? And I think that there's a lot of story to explain in there. Like I've said before, maybe a new film isn't what we should do. Maybe what we should do is a Netflix series of all these different moments in Friday the 13th time with different type of aspects. And that would be cool to see the first time Jason actually died and came back before the events of part 2. And that's the first time he was like, oh crap, like what's going on? And the fact that he's almost, as much as he is an undead killing machine, he's almost as afraid of this power as he is willing to use it. It kind of creeps him out. It's one of the reasons why he wears a mask, because as he's starting to deteriorate, he sees himself as a decomposed corpse. But within that meat puppet is a 12-year-old boy. So imagine a 12-year-old boy trying to figure out this logic and understand what the hell is going on with him, at the same time being driven by this supernatural curse and rage that makes him kill people. And he goes back and forth. And that's a lot of what Never Hike Alone was an exploration of, because at the beginning of the film, he is a curious young child. He's watching Kyle. He's warning him. He's trying to scare him away so he doesn't have to do what he needs to do if he crosses the threshold. And when he eventually crosses the threshold and he reveals the secret, he finds the head, he finds the lair, he finds where he's hiding. You know, the secret has been uncovered. Jason now knows, all right, all bets are off. You got to die. And if Jason had his choice, he's learned from the past. He knows that maybe going after somebody full boat does open up the opportunity for them to get away. And the last thing I want to do is see a bunch of, you know, villagers coming up, you know, the lane with pitchforks and torches. You know, maybe I just wait till this dude falls asleep in front of the fireplace and I just crush his head. You know, he's like, I'm going to take the easy way out. Maybe, you know, and at the beginning of the film, he's testing Kyle. When he steps out from behind him on that trail, he's testing him. He's seeing if this guy's going to run away or if he's going to fight. And what does Kyle do? The first thing he stands up is pull a knife out and he's ready to go. And in that situation, when Jason has no weapon and Jason is more kind of just looming around the forest, it's very, you know, he would have picked him up. He would have jabbed him in the neck. He would have dropped him, been stunned, and he would have got away. And if the game has taught us anything, and 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 so we wanted to show that Jason's learning, that Jason kind of sees that like all I really want is peace. And so in the spirit of part 2, he rebuilt what I call his first childhood home at Camp Crystal Lake. When they first moved in, to me, I came up with this story that, Steve Christie was like, come on in, you can stay with us. Or not Steve Christie, but Steve Christie's dad was like, come on, live with us. You're going to be just fine. And she was like, well, I can't live with him in the girls' cabin because, they don't want him in there. And we don't have money to rent a cabin outside of town because we're broke. I spent all my money traveling around and barely holding jobs. Like, what am I supposed to do? And they were like, you know what? There's an extra space above the kitchen in the pantry. We'll put a bed up there for you. We'll put some stuff up there for you, and you guys can make yourself a nice little home. And so since Jason is kind of like what I say, he slithered back from Manhattan, and kind of built himself back up and all the clothes
and regrew after all that toxic waste.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think that I like, trust me, if I pulled that costume off and I had all the money in the world, he would look like a really pissed off version of Tarman, except he wouldn't have like glowing white eyes and white teeth. He would be kind of skeletal in a lot of ways because a lot of it melted away and a lot of the clothing would have melted away. So over time, to cover himself up, he's collected other pieces of clothing. He found a new mask. And he's been left behind at camp and just living in this kind of dream state of having memories of what it was like to be a boy and seeing his mother and hearing his mother's voice and slowly piecing together his old life to make it feel as comfortable as possible. So he built the first place where his mother and him were actually happy. The first time they moved into Camp Crystal Lake, they were finally accepted. They were finally allowed to be, and they were finally given a place where they could be together. And so Jason's drive as a character is to be reunited with his mother and is to worship his mom. So instead of living out in the woods, now that Camp Crystal Lake has been abandoned and no one's there, he finds that old spot where they once lived and creates kind of his hidden place where he can go and he can just be there and be undisturbed. Because at this point, he's like, Clint Eastwood in that movie, was just like, get off my lawn. You know what I mean? He's just up there. He just wants to be left alone. And he's not out there trying, he's not standing on the shoreline of Crystal Lake on a Sunday saying, you know what, if anybody comes by in a boat, I'm going to shoot them with this arrow. He's not out there looking for trouble. He's trying to avoid it. And if trouble comes his way, someone's going to have to pay. And that's kind of like what Never Hike Alone 2 is about, in a way, where Tom is kind of like, I know he's out there and something's going to trigger him at some point. He's going to be triggered. And we're going to have to deal with it. And there's another character who's like, listen, he's away. Let him be, or maybe he's gone, and let's just not worry about it and stop poking the bear. So, I think that there was a lot of thinking that went into it. It was like a lot of the stuff that went into Never Hike Alone wasn't just, this would be a cool scene. It was like, let's study the story of Friday the 13th. And even though I didn't explain to anybody that was his childhood bedroom, that's the way we shot it. And I think
there's that one scene with the postcard, right?
With the postcard, yeah. So it was like
that told me enough, yeah.
Yeah, and that was. And that was supposed to be the postcard he never got. That was supposed to be the birthday card he never got. Wow. And so it's like, you can't say that out loud. You know what I mean? Like a poor version of the script would have like somehow tried to like get that out in as expository. You know what I mean? Like, it would have tried to like word vomit out some type of explanation of why he found it. I think it's like one of those things where you leave enough crumbs for fans, they're going to get curious and they're going to ask the right questions. And it's during those Q&As and it's during those messages that I get in Facebook when people ask those questions that when I tell them the answer, there's like a secret meaning behind it that only they get. You know what I mean? And I think that that's part of the experience of this film, is that there are so many hidden Easter eggs behind the other Easter eggs that if you really want to talk about it, I'll sit there with any fan who messages me and talk about all the fun stuff that, from a historian standpoint, how this all played out and why everything is the way it is.
Does it frustrate you at all that, like, because I don't remember when it happened. After I saw it, I said, this was still when Paramount and Warner were fighting and whatever. I said, if they were smart, they would just rush and send this guy $1 million and throw another 20 minutes on it. Does it frustrate you that your movie and everything you've just been talking about for the last 20 minutes, there's no way that a major studio would do that for a bunch of reasons?
Oh, I mean, it frustrates me from the standpoint of, I just want studios to go back and learn from the mistakes that were made. You know, I love all the Friday the 13th fans for one reason or another, you know, films for one reason or another. But they're obviously flawed films. And part of the fun is the flaws. You know, we can all joke and have fun with it. But if you're going to go back and you're going to reboot it and you're going to do stuff, why are you either going to, one, completely upset the balance of what we know and make us relearn this franchise from scratch, which is not what we want? And why wouldn't you try to study the franchise from a story standpoint and try to use the things that haven't yet been explored? Like, we haven't seen Pamela's head since part 2. And then when they go and they put it in part 2009, for some reason they stick it in an upstairs bathroom in a hole in the wall when he's living downstairs. And so as a fan, I go, what were you thinking about? And Shannon and Swift are supposed to be big fans. And I sit there and go, like, if you're big fans, why are you sticking his mother's head in the wall? Like, why isn't it downstairs in that mine up on a shrine? Why isn't he protecting that with his life? Why is he leaving it out there to be found? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And it felt like a lot of the things in that movie were written just because they wanted to see something cool happen. And they didn't think about, well, how does this play into previous films, previous lore, previous canon, and how will this play moving forward? And I think that that's ultimately where I run into a lot of issues with that film. You know, another one, you know, when they try to do the thing with Jason Goes to Hell, you know, Sean telling, why am I blanking on Adam? You know, Sean telling Adam to, like, get him out of the mask. You know, why would you do that? And I understand maybe, you know, in the 80s, everyone's sick of it, but, you know, obviously that didn't work. So let's not go down there again, because it obviously took us out of the film and it took us into another realm of calling Jason something that we, you know, I don't think fans as a whole really jump behind, even though that film has fans, and I understand why people like that film for certain aspects. But if you're going to sit down and say, like, we're going to go and rehash out the lore of Friday the 13th, it's like, maybe that's not the way to go. You know, obviously Jason X, silly film. You know, like, you can enjoy it for what it is.
The flashback scene was all right.
Yeah, the flashback scene was pretty cool. And it's fun, you know, and I think it's fun, but I think at the same time, it's like, you know, for me growing up, Friday the 13th was scary. Jason was scary. And he scared the shit out of me. And when I went into the woods at night, or when I was riding my bike home from my friend's house, or if I was swimming in my lake, you know, I was scared. I was scared that Jason was underneath the water, chained down there, and he was within reach to grab my foot. You know, that he was hiding behind a tree, or I was going to bump into his shack, or I was, you know, something was going to happen. And it was like, let's take the things about Jason that scare us and put that back into a film, and start there. But then think about, like, instead of trying to erase the past, how do we invigorate it? How do we take that silly story and just use these, like, little pieces of story logic in a cinematic standpoint, not real life logic, which I think 2009 tried to ground itself in too much. It was like, let's go into the cinematic logic. Let's look at all the opportunities and all the open holes within the film and come up with a theory that would plug the holes, that would make the previous franchise feel even stronger now that we know this little piece of new information, and not erase it. And that's what I think that I've stumbled upon by creating Never Hike Alone and thinking about it all this time, is this, you know, that aspect of the curse. And the aspect of the curse could carry all of the logic from the first film to the last film, skipping some because we'd probably pick up after part 8. If, you know, if I had my druthers, I'd be like, listen, everything in the 80s happened in some way, shape, or form. I won't say that it specifically happened one way or another. Maybe in this universe that we're creating, it happened a little bit differently. Just so we can make sure the logic all ties in, we'll kind of shave off the extra bits that may be a little excruciating to try and deal with. But we'll do our best to fit within that and use that as a challenge rather than being like, well, it doesn't make sense, so let's just start from scratch. And I think that fans ultimately want to see the continuation of the original Jason. I mean, don't you as a fan feel like part 8 ended and then the story is just like, there's like this tethering thing in the wind, like it's undone?
Yeah, well,
or even
Never Hike Alone is my in the last 30 years, I think Never Hike Alone is the best Friday the 13th movie in the last 30 years. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that. Six is the top of the mountain for me.
Mm-hmm.
7, all right. Like I could put up with 7, 8.
I can put up with it. It's funny. Yeah, no, I understand. And like, I think you're talking about in 7 and 8, you're talking about gimmicks that are running the films. You know, it's gimmick first, Jason second. And, in part 6, it was Jason first and Tommy first and story first and character first. And that is what makes that film stand out above the rest. And I think that going forward, films have to do that. It has to be character first. It has to be story first, and the gimmick has to be off to the side. But at the same time, the story has to be something that can live for a few movies. You know what I mean? It can't be just one standalone thing.
You also talked about Easter eggs. I think 6 is the last real movie that, I mean, there's McLaughlin has outright said it's just an homage to Frankenstein. But there's also there's your books, street names, which you kept Cunningham Road. Like there's a bunch of Easter eggs in 6, and I don't like. I could be purposely ignoring it, but I don't think it happens like that after 6.
No, I mean it really, for the most part, these places are all centralized. Like even starting back at part 2, like everybody acknowledges Camp Crystal Lake. But where everything else is on the map is not always spelled out in a way. And in the future, and it's, again, just hinting at the piece of Easter egg in the script that's going to be there. What happened to all these properties? They're all still there, right? And I think that as a fan, I want a universe in which all these places exist, and that this place exists. And it's not just the camp, it's the life outside the camp, it's within the town, and it's the way that people deal with it. There was a little bit of that in the first one when you meet the people at the diner and the way that they interact. And then the way that, Crazy Ralph is there kind of kicking around. And then the way that, they talk about the camp when they're there, and the way that Steve Christie treats it, and all these different things. It's like, it feels like it's part of a place. And I feel like as the films went on, they got away from that because they just kept establishing new places. And I want to go back to the first place because that's where the best stories are told. And I think that part 6 did that in a way because they brought back the camp. I will tell you this, in the world of Never Hike Alone, my change to the canon is that Camp Forest Green was built very near Camp Crystal Lake, but not on Camp Crystal Lake. It's not the same place. If you continue down a trail at Camp Forest Green, you would have found the old camp. It's a little bit, I like, in a way, it was like, it's a very similar idea, and why I really like that script, of the way that that Bruckner and Ann Costa wrote it, was that there was Camp Crystal Lake, and it was on the lake, but then those kids in that script talk about the real camp, the original camp, is across the cove, and we got to take boats to get over there. And I was like, oh my God, a boat ride in the middle of the night, the fog coming off the thing, coming into the camp. That's a movie. You know what I mean? That's a scene that I want to be in, and I'm going to be in my chair, like gripping it tight, because you're going to be like, pushing someone towards the edge of a cliff. You're going to be trying to push back and be like, no, don't push me off this cliff. But as moviegoers, we like that experience. We fight, but we also like being pushed off the cliff. And, that was kind of part of, I didn't have the budget for for boats and fog on the lake. And filming by the lake and doing it that way, but that's what I wanted to do. It was like with Kyle and his GoPro, I was putting the audience on this way that I was pushing them through Camp Crystal Lake. And when we're in the GoPro footage, we're putting them first, and we're putting them towards the edge of the cliff and pushing them like, oh, you're going to be the first one that goes upstairs. Oh, you're going to be the first one that goes into the attic. Oh, you're going to be the first one that goes through, the sheets and stuff like that. And so it was constantly putting the characters, the audience at the forefront. As kind of a way to do it. And it's just, that's the experience I think that Jason brings. It's the old films did that. You didn't see Jason on screen a lot. The characters were moving around sets and environments in which you knew that there was somebody there, and eventually they were going to pop out, and it was the anticipation of them popping out. So there's a little bit of that kind of needs to happen. Not always just turning and he's there, but that, all of a sudden the knife might pop out from behind a wall. And you don't know. You know, it's like, it's stuff like that. It doesn't always have to be Jason shows up on screen and kills somebody on screen. Sometimes it's just an arm with a weapon attached to it that swings through the frame when everyone's least expecting it, and we're moving on. And then you're teasing the reveal of what's going to eventually happen.
So Never Hike Alone 2 is a very strong possibility.
I mean, I don't know how strong the possibility is because it depends on how seriously people take me.
Well, I guess let me amend the question. Then you're still pretty well charged and into it if people want to see it.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's written.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have the whole. I mean, I wrote Never Hike Alone 2 while I was finishing Never Hike Alone 1. That's awesome. Like talking with Tom, talking about where it could go, getting inspired by, you know, in order to kind of like I did with the bedroom thing that I was talking about before, like I didn't just say, hey, Tom, you're the paramedic, go do it. You know, it was, let me figure out why you're the paramedic. Let me figure out where you've been for the last 30 years and what you've been up to. And in the process and in the pursuit of figuring out who that character is, the story presented itself to me. And the dynamic of the town presented itself to me because I needed good reasons for him to be in the position he was in. I didn't want it to feel like hammy. I didn't want it to feel forced. I wanted him to feel natural in that role and why he would be there. And if we thought about it, okay, this is somebody who has been through a lot of trauma in their life, which also makes them very adept to dealing with trauma. And if he is spent his life in and out of mental institutions or he's been involved with so many tragic events, it doesn't make so much sense. I mean, it makes a ton of sense that he would be drawn to it in a way, almost addicted to it. It's a little bit of his character flaw in part 6. You know, he's drawn to go do something.
Obsessed, sure,
and he's obsessed. And I think with him, you know, there's a certain guilt after part 6 because he's obviously raised Jason and killed a bunch of people by doing that inadvertently, not meaning to do it. And, you know, he probably deals with a lot of guilt. So becoming a paramedic, you know, a job he could probably get hired for with his record, and showing, you know, who he can be in the line of duty and saving lives and, you know, being someone who's going to run into the fire. Tommy's a guy who's going to run into the fire. So it makes sense for him to be this type of character. Also, it allows him to keep his finger on the pulse. I mean, obviously no one's hiring him to be a cop. Not that police force.
Right.
And, you know, a fireman wasn't quite going to cut it. You know, if he was, you know, maybe he's a volunteer fireman. I've thought about that too. Like he's a paramedic, volunteer fireman. He's doing whatever he can to be in the know and be around the events that happen at Crystal Lake. So if there's a mysterious death, he's going to be on the inside and he's going to be able to keep an eye on it. And part of that obsession is also ruining his life in a certain way. You know, Tom and I have talked about the, you know, the Megan character and like where they went after that. And yeah, everybody thinks that there's probably a happy ending, and maybe for a time there was, but you know, think about it. Her dad died in that town. Does she really want to stick around? And does he want to leave because he feels like the protector of the town? So there's that dynamic, you know, so pulling at him and he's going off and doing things and maybe, you know, exploring the camp from time to time, and he's kicking around, but not finding anything. And go ahead.
Do you have, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Do
you have a theory and or I guess if you plan on covering it, by all means don't say anything, but if you don't, do you have a theory on what happened to Trish?
Actually, you know, when it comes to these things, I always tend to let the original actors who have talked about it kind of lead the way. And I think I recall hearing that the actress who played Trish mentioned that she ended up getting involved in law enforcement. That's where she saw it, that she was like, that experience kind of traumatized her. And so now she went into complete self-defense and, you know, she's kind of always on guard. And so for Trish, I think that she was the smarter of the two, and she's the one that moved away. She's the one that started a life somewhere else. I could see her going to live with her dad in New York, and living a different life and obviously caring for Tommy, but obviously dealing with Tommy's troubles. She's probably one that shows up every now and then at the family gathering and says, Tom, what are you still doing living in this town? You know, I wanted to go with, you know, I don't want to, this doesn't really spoil anything, but in my version of next Friday the 13th, he's still living in the Jarvis house. He went back, he bought awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, they're like, how crazy are you to live in the house where like all these people were killed? But the way that I've kind of positioned it in the town of where it is, it's kind of, it's close. It's close to Camp Crystal Lake, and there's a reason why he still lives there. It's because it gives him access. There are trails that still lead there. There are things that he can do to, like, he's basically the first house in the line of defense that's there. There's like all these properties that were attacked over time aren't spread vastly throughout Crystal Lake. They're all right around that area. Mm-hmm. And slowly but surely, the people in that town are like, okay, maybe no one should live out there. Maybe we should pull people back. That's why in Never Hike Alone, there's a wildlife preservation that's been propped up. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a front. It's definitely a front. There's no real wildlife preservation. It's just the people who run Camp Crystal Lake are now like, listen, like, we can't have people going out there. We can't have people exploring it. We can't get people getting tongue-in-cheeky and saying, hey, look, Camp Crystal Lake's on the map. We should go check it out and go do a seance or something. You know what I mean? Like, they probably had a problem with that and people going missing. And eventually they went, okay, take it off the map. You know, they're kind of taking the Freddy approach to it too. Like, if we don't know it's there and nobody thinks about it, then nobody will go. And so, you know, it no longer shows up on the map. You know, access to it is cut off. And anybody who, you know, when you threaten hikers with massive fines for going in this wildlife preservation, you know, they're going to avoid going to, and it's going to mitigate the risk. And they think that that's good enough to stop it. And Tom is the only one who's like, great plan, but it's not going to work. It's only going to work for so long. Eventually, some asshole is going to wander in there and we're all going to pay for it. And Kyle is the jerk. And so, you know, and that's a little bit of Never Hike Alone too, is that Kyle has to come to the same type of realization that Tommy did in part 6 of like, oh crap, I should have never gone beyond the threshold, and now this is my fault that this supernatural being is now out looking for me and killing everybody in his path.
So if you do Never Hike Alone 2, Tom he's on board with it?
Oh, he's 100% on board. He's actually the main character.
Oh, okay.
We tell the Never Hike Alone 2, I mean, as much as like it would be like, hey, you know, just continue it from where it left off. I want people to think of Never Hike Alone 1 as the graphic novel that you read before you go see the feature film. And you're not going to see as much of Kyle's adventure per se as we do in Never Hike Alone. But if you watch Never Hike Alone, you'll understand more of where he's been. And you're going to see the entire perspective from Tom's point of view and, you know, the things that are going on. And we're going to tease Kyle. And fans who know who Kyle is and have seen Never Hike Alone 1 are going to know exactly what he's up to, but we're not going to show his entire journey. Tom is the character in that film, as the lead character in the film. You have to discover it with Tom. And so when Tom discovers what he is, you know, what he's been up to and how he does it is a very clever way to tie back into Never Hike Alone 1. And then once he understands what's happened, then the story kicks up from there. But I would say Never Hike Alone 2 starts the morning of the day that Kyle finds Camp Crystal Lake. He's already out in the woods. He's already exploring, and we'll introduce him in a certain scene. And then you'll follow Tom, and eventually, you know, he'll get the call from a forest ranger that's found a lost hiker, and he's going to show up, and we're going to find Kyle on the side of the road. And, you know, a lot of people have asked me, like, well, how did they find him? Like, he just randomly found that? Oh, that's cheap. And I'm like, there's a reason. Like, one, you're showing a film from one character's perspective. To just suddenly cut to another character's perspective would be even more jarring than waking up in the back of an ambulance. Mm-hmm. 2, Friday the 13th film is known for this. I mean, how many characters have been pulled into the lake or jumped through a window or, you know, even the cutscene in part 4 where, you know, Jason's standing there behind Trish, you know, and all of a sudden you cut to, you're in the hospital. And, you know, from our perspective, we did give everybody the information. It just takes a little bit of paying attention to understand what happened. Is Kyle says in his final confessional, if I can get my stuff and I can get out of there, I can get back on the trail I'm supposed to be on and hopefully find some help. And that's what happened. He just escaped Crystal Lake. We saw him run out in that direction. He eventually got to the edge of the trail. He got back on the one he was supposed to be on, but between blood loss and just being completely having the crap kicked out of him, he passed out and, you know, went unconscious on the side of the road. And eventually, being in a place in the forest where that are populated by other people, he was found. Someone called the police. Someone called an ambulance. They showed up. They stuck him in the back of the ambulance, and he didn't wake up until he was in the back of there. And that's where we pick up the story. How that happens, we want to explore that in the other film because there's some fun stuff that happens. There's some fun stuff that happen to other characters. And then the film kicks off the moment Jason attacks that ambulance. And that starts kind of the ticking clock of, okay, now it's been unleashed. Jason is on the warpath. After all this time, how are we going to stop him? And now all this time that Tommy's been spent preparing for this moment. I mean, think about it. It's a little bit like the new Halloween. It's like you spent all these years preparing. Now it's time to enact your plan. What are you going to do? And will it play out the way you want it to? And Tommy needs the help of this character because he holds a certain piece of information that Tommy doesn't have. And the two of them have to work together and come together as the guy who's been feeling guilty for what he's done for 30 years. And this guy who suddenly feels guilty for like, oh my God, it's my fault. You know, the guys on your EMT team got killed. It's my fault that this character is now attacking people in town and coming after me. You know, what am I supposed to do? And Tom's like, well, you got to bring me back to the camp because this is all going to end there. And then you have the character go, well, no way in hell I'm going back to that camp. And, you know, having the forces that drive them back there and the characters that are, you know, getting in the way of these things. You know, it kind of like, again, like if Never Hike Alone was a love letter to the Friday the 13th franchise, Never Hike Alone 2 is a love novel. And it brings in a lot of aspects from that pays off a lot of things that have been set up and just never paid off. And this is just a way of paying off the characters and everything we know about Friday the 13th in a way that is fun and exciting. And you know, the sequences that we want to through and see him do are things that we've always wanted to see Jason do at a certain level. Maybe they didn't have the technology or they didn't have the ability to do that in the 80s like we do now. The ability, you know, to film digitally and film much faster and do better prosthetics and better, you know, practical effects because things can be made quicker and easier and more lifelike. And we want to see those things played out. And that's what we want to see. And we also want to see the story carry on. So it's both. It's like we want to see the old story carry on in a new way that old fans are going to love it. New fans are going to catch up right away. It's not going to be hard to figure out what's going on. And, you know, eventually bring it to a big climax that, you know, is going to show off like all the power of Jason and all the determination of Tommy.
So do you think you can get all that done for under 50K?
No, no way. Not the stuff that we've written in there. Just the fact that, you know, one of the reasons why we were able to afford such a high level production value for this film is the fact that it stars one character for a majority of the time. A character, you know, an actor that came out and dedicated a year of his life of not cutting his hair, of not shaving his beard, of giving up other projects because he wouldn't do those things, or he would shave his beard and we'd have to wait 6 weeks for it to grow back before we could start shooting again. And that, so we were able to get away with that. And then I had a small scene at the end where we had some people that I didn't necessarily have to pay. They did it as a volunteer. For this film to work, we're going into town. We're talking about going to a hospital. We're talking about shooting in town with extras and more crew, higher level stunts, higher level effects, you know, multiple kills, lots and lots of kills. And that's expensive. And, you know, for 50K, I could give you a piece of it and I could maybe build it in pieces 50K at a time. But I think one of two things I would like to do. One, I just want to sit down with somebody involved with the franchise as it's going to be moved forward, whether it's at Warner Brothers or New Line, whether it's somehow it bounces back to Paramount. I know Brad Fuller just posted yesterday that, you know, the Platinum Dudes wants it back. If it lands in that, you know, in the place of the Blumhouse guys, excuse the stuff going on in the background. You know, if it lands in the back of Blumhouse or Ghost, you know, Ghost House or any of these pictures, no matter where it lands, just bring me in. Let me pitch you. Like, just let me pitch you this story and see if you're willing to do it. And if you're not, I also have another one that I've always thought about doing. And if you don't like that one, well, can I have special permission to go to crowdfunding and raise more than $50,000? Because then I would approach and say, fans, if you really want this, then we need to raise as much money as possible. You know, Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham, no matter where the rights stand, whoever wants to be paid, no matter what they need, kind of like what the guys with the game did, is say, listen, if you give us special permission, if you give us like a special release, you know, we'll involve you in the project. This won't impact what you're trying to do in the theaters. We're just trying to get this story out because there's a fan base that wants to see it. They're willing to pay for it and they're willing to support it. And this doesn't hurt anybody. In fact, it helps invigorate the franchise and keep it even more alive with more people. We don't see either one of those avenues I'm willing to go down.
Yeah. So would it be, so I'm sorry, I to the people in the chat, I didn't look at the chat at all. I
Oh
apologize.
yeah, I haven't looked either.
Robbie asks, would part 2 be a short or a feature? Which
Oh,
part
feature.
1 is? Well,
It'd be a feature.
What do you consider Never Hike Alone? Because that's dangerously close to a short.
I consider it an episode of Black Mirror meets Friday the 13th.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, this is the way that our medium is broken out. There's 22-minute half-hour shows, there's 54-minute hour-long shows, and there's 75+ features. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a short feature in a way, but it kind of fits into that aspect of like a Netflix show that goes on for an hour. An episode
pilot. Should be the
pilot. It's a pilot. Yeah, it is. It's like a pilot episode for an hour-long show, TV show. And that's kind of what we ended up fitting it in. Originally, it was supposed to be a 22-minute version of that. But once we had the interiors and the second thing, that turned it into the next stage. And, a lot of people, I love the question, like, well, why didn't you just do an extra 20 minutes? And I'm like, well, do you have an extra $20,000? Do you want to help me, rig these stunts that we're going to do in like this ambulance and stuff? Like,
well, yeah, that's where, like, when I was first watching it, the first thing that came to my head was a studio would never release this because you go 20 minutes without ever having a kill. I think it's maybe 20 minutes before you even see Jason.
Yep.
And from what I remember, I think Tom McLaughlin said you got to go 15 minutes and have either tits or kill, and that your formula just wouldn't work for studios.
Well, I wanted to prove that wrong. I don't think that's what makes a Friday.
I agree with you 1 million.
You know what I mean? I think if you want to limit yourself to that formula, you're going to fall short. Part of what 2009 did, they went with the 1980s formula. It's not the same audience. Like, you're talking about audiences that are walking out of films like Get Out and Hereditary going, that's the scariest film I've ever seen. You know what I mean? And those films are slow. And those films are slow burn, and they take their time and they pull back that elastic band till the point of its highest tension and then release it and snap it on your skin. And that's what the horror audience is like these days. I mean, yeah, there's people, there's the Terrifiers out there of the world, and there's the Victor Crowleys, but look at where those films are releasing. They're not going to the theater. They're going straight to VOD. And, it's because that's become the niche audience. We all love the 80s and all that stuff, but, filmmaking has got a lot more sophisticated since then, and it's not as easy and simple. And if you don't adapt with the times, you're not going to succeed. And part of what I was trying to do with Never Hike Alone was say, listen, Friday the 13th has to adapt. Like, we can't just be doing the same formula, because the same formula doesn't work the same way anymore. It might work for us Friday the 13th fans, but at the end of the day, these producers and these studios have to pay their bills. They have to walk out on top of the film. They can't just say oh, well, this is for the fans, so we'll lose, a couple $1,000,000. Who's going to care? That's not the way these people think. So when you go into it, I think my argument for the studio would be like, you can follow the old formula, but it's proven to not be as lucrative as something that is a little bit more well thought out, and something new. And I think that Friday, Never Hike Alone proves to a certain degree that tension can carry the film, and that Jason, as long as you pay it off well in the end, you'll do it. And I do got to give credit to Andrew immensely, because he carries those first 15 minutes, the first 15 to 20 minutes. The reason why you're invested is because he's captured your attention, and he's worth watching, and he's worth carrying the film that you forget. And I wanted fans, when they're watching this film, to forget that they're watching Friday the 13th. The film slowly transitions into a Friday the 13th film. It starts off as 127 hours and it ends as Friday the 13th. And you're watching it, and you're like, and people who aren't familiar with Friday the 13th don't even realize it. People who are watching it going like, well, when's it going to start? But they're like, oh, okay, this is a different film. This is an adventure film. Okay, so it's an adventure film until you start hitting the thresholds. And every time he passes another threshold, even the score and the music starts to change. Like, we start off obviously with our big kind of Bernard Herrmann-y score that, was reverse engineered from Friday the 13th. Because Harry Manfredini was obviously influenced by the Psycho score, a lot of the same instruments, a lot of the same tempos and stings. So we went back and said, well, if he was inspired by Bernard Herrmann in Bizarro World, what other Bernard Herrmann score could we lean on that would fit this film? And we went and looked at Vertigo. And if you notice, the way that we structure our song at the beginning is it's very much like the Vertigo score, very high highs, very low lows, and it goes back and forth. And that starts the tension. That music starts the tension. And I love what Ryan did with the strings and the way they kind of come in and out. We wanted to set that up and set it up as like, this is a horror film right away. You're watching this guy drive out into this beautiful landscape, but the music underneath is foreboding and dangerous, and something's going to happen. And then you start the film, and the music is digital and it's contemporary and it fits our character. And then he discovers the no trespassing sign, and we start to reveal the strings and the violins and the other things that are coming in. And slowly but surely, the film turns into a more traditional Friday the 13th. And that's how we wanted it to play out. It's the way our first trailer plays out. It starts off as like a guy you think is just on a hiking journey, and then all of a sudden it's a reveal that Jason is there. And yeah, I think it was us kind of saying that, like, yeah, this is a rediscovery of Jason Voorhees. This is a rediscovery of Friday the 13th. And we're pulling you out of this gap in time that we've had with these films and reintroducing you in a way that may be more familiar to modern audiences.
So conversely, do you think that there's a bit of freedom with what you're doing because you don't have studios saying, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that?
That is the blessing and the curse. Mm-hmm. It's a blessing and a curse, because when you have studio backing, you have backing. Mm-hmm. When you need a techno crane, they fly in a techno crane for you. When you need, this and that, there's a production team of 15 people that are all working for you. At the same time, every time you want something, you have to answer 20 questions to 20 different people about why you want it, why you need it, what's its purpose. Do you really need that thing? But you know what? I had this idea, I was talking to my friend's little kid, and they came up with a great idea for your film that I now want in it, and you go, what? Like, really? And that overhead, that studio kind of mentality of, yeah, you're the director, but this is our picture. And the great thing about being a fan film and doing your own independent production is you answer to no one, but you're responsible for all those answers you come up with. You're responsible for executing everything you say you're going to execute. And it's not easy because you're wearing several different hats. I mean, I was directing, I was writing, I was acting in it, I was producing it, I was working with my producing partners. Like, we're all spread to the gills, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Spread to the wind on this thing. Like, one guy was working on permits, another guy was working on booking people, and I was working on scheduling and getting the days ready to be shot, and doing my own shot lists, doing my own schedules, in the process of thinking, like, how is these scenes going to be executed? And through that work, and then saying, well, how are we going to afford this? How much of the budget is going to go towards that? Because if we spend this much here, that means we need to take it out of this. And it was being very conscious of that. And so that's something when you're directing on a feature that's studio backed, you don't have to think about. You just throw out an idea, you make your case, and the money either shows up or it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to worry about whether or not that's coming out of your bank account. It's coming out of it's coming out of Mr. Warner's bank account. And when it's your money and you're responsible for it, or you've been given money by crowdfunding, fans who have entrusted you with $20,000, you want to make sure that you're spending it wisely. Mm-hmm. And you're responsible for it. So, it comes with great responsibility, as much as it gives you the freedom to be like, hey, if I come up with an idea that I'm going to stick Jason in the back of an ambulance, flash red lights, and then he's out there and he's going to stab him in the middle of the forest, no one can walk me back from that idea. Unless they present to me a reason why it doesn't make any sense. But when I pitched that to my crew and they were like, that sounds amazing, how are we going to do it? It became like, well, how do we do it? Let's figure it out. And for very low cost, we were able to execute that scene and add another piece into that film that raised the production value and raised the tension value of what's going on at the end of the film. So there's things like that. And, it's a little bit of, it's the good and the bad of everything.
Yeah. Without taking anything away from you, do you think that because you were able to put such care and love into it, that's how you got the finished product? Like if say somebody who contributed money said, I don't like that, do this. Do you think you would have the same product if you were messed with at all in the process?
I have a saying on set, and it's something that I'm not going to take credit for coming up with this saying because I heard it on another set, but I wholeheartedly believe in it. Mm-hmm. And the saying goes, if enough people tell you you're drunk, lay down. And I believe that if I come up with an idea and enough people on my team are like, bad idea, unless it's something that I just that I can just see and understand. And there might have been one or two things that were like that, where people were like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Just trust me, go with me on this."
Mhm.
And you have to pick your battles. You can't, when you're directing a film, I think what some people often don't understand about a director is that they think that they're the smartest person in the room, that the director is the one who knows everything, who, can do anything. And it's absolutely not the case. The director is a storyteller. The director knows the tone, they know where everything needs to be. But as a director, I can't sew my own costumes. I can't operate a camera like a professional DP can operate a camera. If I want a certain move, I may not know all of the aspects of what it takes to execute that move and how long it will take. So when my DP comes to me, or my stunt coordinator comes to me, or my effects person comes to me and say, "Listen, we love what you come up with, but here's an issue. You either have to give this up, or you need to give me 3 hours to prep, or you need to do this, or you need to do that." And it's the discussion with your people that you've hired that create the film the way it is, because they keep you in check. Because obviously we all want pie for the sky ideas. We want, the whole town to be burning and everything's on fire. And, we want to George Lucas everything,
CGI
it's like,
Pamela, I'm telling you.
what they say. And like when they were doing they were making fun of the prequels for Star Wars, and they were talking about the guy, like, every frame is so saturated with things. You know what I mean? It's like, we want to put all the things in, but you have people surrounding you that remind you what your limitations are. And if you don't listen to them, you're going to fail. And if you don't listen to the people who are around you that say, "Listen, like, there might be a better way to execute this," or even someone just sitting down saying, "Hey, I have an idea." You want to open up that floor, because when your team feels like they're just as much a part of the process as you are, they're more willing to help you out, especially when they're all taking cut and pay. And so there were plenty of ideas in this film that came from not just me, that came from the whole team. And my responsibility was just how to execute them in the best way and put everybody on the same page and inspire everybody to do it the best that we could. So, that being said, if I had there was never a time where a backer said, "Oh, you have to do this or I'm out." At that point I already had their money. So I'm going to be like, I'm like, sorry, but like, for example, Matthew Barrett, who's one of the producers on the film, was a Kickstarter backer, and he came in at the highest tier. And being that he came in at the highest tier, one of the things I always did was anybody who backed like $1,000 or more, who went up to that range, which I was like, "I can't believe you did this for a fan film. Like, you're crazy." But I called Matt on the phone and I said, what is it about this film that appeals to you? And what is it about Friday that appeals to you? And I'll try to bring that element into it so you feel like you have an influence. And he talked about part 3. And the thing he loves about part 3 is that it's the longest, or one of the longest, chase sequences at the end of the film. And I went, "Well, you're going to love this movie." And I said, "Okay." And I think a lot of the times, as directors can sometimes get lost in when someone gives them a note, that the note has to be executed specifically how that person is asking it. And that's not often the case. What has to be studied is why the note is being given. And ultimately, if you study why a note is being given, you will understand why the note is being given and how to address it. Oh, we should do this because this scene specifically is making them feel this way. But if we answer this question, not necessarily doing it the way that they do it, it solves this question of why or where or how. And that's the challenge as a director, is not just, I was talking to somebody yesterday. In fact, I've been helping out with another Friday the 13th project called Mythos. And Jeremy's working on them out there.
Okay.
I know.
The one I know about is called Voorhees, but
yep. So there's Voorhees, there's Mythos. This is the guy that's Slash and Cast doing theirs. There's one that I just got invited to yesterday called Jason Rising. A longtime contributor to a lot of the different blogs that I think we're both on. Brandy Dixon is doing her own. And they're all at different levels. They're all at different production values, and everyone's kind of jumping into the ring. And it's very exciting to see fans invigorated to make their own films. So, I was talking to Jeremy, and he's working on a trailer right now, and he sent it out to a few people to get notes, and we all send our notes back, and he, messages me. He's like, "You like this thing, but somebody else doesn't like it. And you don't like this thing, but they like it." And I'm like, "Jeremy, it's not, we're not sitting here telling you exactly what you have to do. You have to interpret these notes and figure out what's best for you." And that's a challenge. It's as a director, there's nothing worse than letting people down. It's the last thing we want to do. The last thing we want people doing is walking out of, our film going, "Oh Jesus, that was awful," or
Well,
"I wish I never watched that film." You know what I mean?
Let me piggyback that with
Go ahead.
a kind of an add-on question. When you were in front of the camera, who was it that you trusted most to help you? Because I mean, you were Jason in the movie for you said 60% of it. So who was it that you trusted not to screw? I don't want to say screw up your vision, but
who to take the reins, and that was it was passing the baton back and forth between Chris and JD. But depending on the element, the two DPs.
Okay.
So they were the ones behind the camera putting everything in. Also Jess Bennett when it was time for stunts. Also Kelsey Burke when it was time for special effects makeup. Because when I was in that makeup, I wasn't in front of the camera. I couldn't even see. Like I couldn't see anything. I just kind of had to guess where I was. And Kelsey was the one who was out there behind monitor because that's her department. And she wants to make sure that the stuff that we came up with is being executed how we designed it. And she's going to know how VFX or special effects, photograph better than anybody. So it was a little bit of the passing of the baton. There were times when we were able to put a wireless monitor out on set and I could see myself in the frame. So I could position myself and change my posturing and, get into the right mode. Because, it's very easy to fall out of the posturing for Jason. It's not something that's very natural. He's so crooked and he stands kind of weird. And if you're not standing in the right position, the character can seem different. And so there was always that like posture check and then going from there. And then it was the reason why I didn't spend the entire time in costume was when we did do that. Yeah, I would entrust everybody to get the shot, but then we would stop. I would have a monitor brought over to me. I would watch the shot. I would give my notes and I would say, well, if this is going to execute, this is going to be here and this is going to be there. And you have to move the camera like this. Okay, go back, reset and go. So we could do that when it was 5 of us, when it's me in costume and I have my 2 cameramen out there and Andrew's there and I got my producer off to the side running sound and doing everything else. You can pull that stuff off because you got all the time in the world and there aren't a bunch of people watching you. When you have 25 people on set, then it gets a little different because now the clock is ticking. You have to get all these shots done by the end of the day. You're paying a lot of these people to be there. And that's when it made sense for me to be out of the costume, put Brian Forrest in it. In a lot of those times, we're also doing a lot of the stunts. So when you're throwing somebody through a breakaway table, when you're swinging weapons at each other, it's probably better that someone who's trained to wield weapons and 2 people that are trained to take punishment are the ones out there. Jess Bennett put it best when we were early on in the project. And, Andrew and I were very cocky and we said, we're going to do all our own stunts. And she was like, sure you are. And she said, I have no doubt that you are both physically capable men of achieving your own stunts and doing everything that's written in this script. But here's the thing. One thing goes wrong. What happens then? What happens when you fall the wrong way? What happens when you break your wrist?
That's a picture wrap right there.
There's a picture wrap. There's 6 months down the tube. You know what I mean? And she was right. And I said, okay. So when we go after these dangerous stunts and we do all this stuff and, we talk about everything that needs to happen, like, the scene where, let's talk about the scene where, Andrew gets thrown up. Well, not Andrew, but Kyle gets thrown up against the tree. That was probably the most painful stunt on the entire picture. Donnie Nichols, who's Andrew's stunt double, had to run full speed, jump through the air, flip, and slam his back on a tree. Now he was wearing padding, and he was doing that, but there was one time he did it and he hurt himself. He could barely walk. Now imagine if that was Andrew. Andrew just throws himself up against the tree, hits his back so bad he could barely walk. Now he's got to act. How is he going to, get a good performance if he's on the ground reeling in pain, which, hey, use it. You know what I mean? But he's now got to get up and run away. And if he can't get up and run away, then we can't get the shot we need. So, we ended up, we took our medicine. Jess was right. And as much as it, you should have seen me. I was like a little kid. I was like, I don't want to take off the costume. You know what I mean? There's that side of it. But at the same time, there's a lot of fun directing Jason too. It's a lot of fun being behind camera and having real time directing rather than set it, render it. Okay, that's what it looks like. All right, now we got to set the keys and render again. It was I don't know. I remember this old program when I was in school learning computers, and you'd have to type in the instructions before it actually actioned it out.
Yeah.
And then you'd watch it action out and be like, oh, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here I got to change this. You know what I mean? And so it slowed it down rather than like, oh, I can do this as it goes. So Brian gave us that opportunity, and he's a professional. He did all the stunts, as far as, you know, swinging the weapons around and fighting. And you know, there was stuff that like I wanted to get in and do. There was stuff that I was scheduled to get in and do that I didn't get to because we were just moving so fast, and he was doing such a good job that I was like, you know what, like, you just stick in there. Let's just keep the momentum up. We shouldn't stop production so I can go, you know, slip that sweaty silicone hood on. Let's do this right. And so,
did you come to moments where you were able to, if it happened, to objectively say, you know what, as Jason, as you know, in front of the camera, were you able to have moments, or were there moments where you objectively looked at something that you did and said, you know what, I got to change that. That's not good.
All the time. I mean, that was like the entire process. There was stuff on the trail scene that we changed a lot of because of that. We go back and watch the footage and be like, you know what, like, because I was in costume the whole time and we were moving fast, and there were things that I saw and did. They were like aspects of like the way the costume was sitting on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, wait, you guys didn't tell me like my collar was popped? I'm like, Jason doesn't pop the collar. Like, this is not what he looks like.
No, he's a millennial now. It's totally cool.
Yeah. And so there were things like that where where I would say like, we got to go do it again. Yeah. I'm like, this isn't right. You know, and
it's awesome.
And there are still things in the film that I would still go back and you know, okay, now that we've learned this, or like certain things, like there were definitely shots from the beginning of shooting that ended up in the film, and then there were shots from the end of filming where we figured everything out, that it's like, I wish we were functioning at this level the entire time. We're not, but there's enough of it that it carries the film, and you know, maybe people notice, but it doesn't ruin the film. Mm-hmm. But using that momentum, you know, doing, say, a Never Hike Alone 2, or doing more shorts, or doing different stories, all of those lessons we learned would then be put into practice in the new one, and we would be at that high functioning rate from the beginning. And who knows where that would go from there, because I'm sure we'd get even better with certain aspects of the filmmaking process from there, and you know, quality would just continue to improve.
Okay, so at least 4 people have asked now, how do they get a copy of the Blu-ray?
Oh, you guys missed out, didn't you?
Yeah, so, I would say myself included. So
well, so I did take that into consideration when ordering the Blu-rays, just so you know, they're still in production. I have behind the scenes to cut. So the film's been exported because we had, you know, a fresh export of the film made from the 4K version. You know, I've designed the menus. I've designed everything that needs to go in. The only thing that needs to be done is the BTS, which means gathering people for interviews and doing it. And we're probably about halfway through interviews. I got another, you know, I'd say 8 to go, including Tom. That because people have asked for the Blu-ray, for the BTS to be included. So that's going to be a part of it. It's going to take me all of July, probably partially into August. Turnaround to get everything done is a couple of weeks. So I'll probably be receiving the Blu-rays the last week of August or the first week of September. And when I put in my quantity order, I definitely made sure to order more than what was ordered. Okay. Not a tremendous amount more, but there is, you know, we obviously needed to be safe because we're going to send out all of our Blu-rays first to the Indiegogo backers. Sure. Once they all get their Blu-rays and nobody writes me back and says, this POS doesn't work. And I say, well, you probably got a faulty one. Here's another one. Mm-hmm. And I go through that part of that, and, you know, people on the crew get theirs. There's going to be a leftover part. And so what I'm asking people to do is, as a celebratory thing, on July 13th, the next Friday the 13th, write an email to contact@wompstompfilms.com saying you want to request a Blu-ray and you want to be put on the wait list. We're going to take those emails. We're going to put them in a folder. And as the order they come in, we're going to store them. And then once we get through all of the process of Indiegogo backers and anything that's faulty and all that stuff, we'll then do individual orders for everything that's left. And we'll go one at a time, and we'll just hit you up on Square payments, and we'll do it that way. And that will help us with the final fundraising to help with what we're going to donate to United Way, and then a couple other charities that have kind of sprung up that we're like, oh, you know what, these things might need a little bit more than all the money United Way has. So let's help the smaller ones out and do that. So that will help us just kind of with the final fundraising for all the stuff that we're going to donate.
What kind of substance or liquid was used for Jason's blood when it oozes from his mask?
So that is it's food coloring, black food coloring mixed with KY jelly.
Hey,
Hey now.
that must have been fun spitting that out, huh?
Well, that was Brian. And
yeah, I'm not doing that take.
No, we had tubes in the mask, so he didn't have to spit
okay.
it out. We had tubes, and there was a tube coming out of the neck. That was all meant, and we were pumping it through. And there's a fun kind of like explanation of what that is, because it's a mixture of blood and other things, and it's so old that that it's something different. But I've had this crazy theory about Jason and kind of what's keeping him going. I don't want to spoil it now, but that substance is kind of special. It's kind of part of the essence that keeps him going. It's part of an essence of the curse. So, so he doesn't have like typical red blood when he gets cut. I mean, obviously he's also undead too. So like his blood isn't sitting in there staying red and pulpy. It's, turning and coagulating and getting thick. And so it's a mixture of blood and like swamp water and mud and like everything else that's like in his veins kind of all mixed together.
That's awesome. Yeah, and his heart makes morticians want to eat it. And that's
like an apple.
So if people want to, well, like, I guess, how soon do you think you're going to approach? If people want to get behind this, you're going to open the door for that. And how would people be able to help?
For Never Hike Alone 2?
Yes.
I think that right now the best thing to do is if you've watched it and you've liked the film and you know other people who will probably like it and watch it, make them watch it. Make them watch it individually so our plays go up faster too. But share it with your friends. Share it with anybody who's a Friday the 13th fan and they either haven't heard of it or they have heard of it and they go, fan film. I'm not gonna watch a fan film.
I'm that person. I'll be honest.
And so am I. You know what I mean? Like, there's only so many fan films I've been able to sit through from across genres. And very seldomly does one come across that has that's watchable. You know what I mean? And we're all having fun and it's fun to watch with your friends. But we wanted to send a message with this one, and the best way to send a message is to keep watching it, to keep it in the public eye. When you see Blumhouse or Platinum Dunes or anybody post saying, hey, we'd really like to take a crack at Friday the 13th, tag Never Hike Alone in it. Say that you want to see it from us rather than anybody else, or you'd like to see us consulted, and just keep our name in their mix and just, keep promoting Womp Stomp Films. And sharing our photos and doing all those things, visiting us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, retweeting us and just, keeping us in the discussion. Because this, obviously it's very unfortunate with the legal battle that's going on right now. We're all sitting around waiting with our hands tied. There's nothing we can do. There's no sense in getting mad. There's no sense in sending death threats to anybody. It just is what it is at this moment. And all we can do is sit back and stay a part of the conversation. And when people talk about Friday the 13th, we hope that in this modern day that Never Hike Alone is a part of that discussion. And the way that happens is by our fans. The fan support that we've had so far, people retweeting us, just sending us messages and sharing it with their friends. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Cody says, fuck yeah, promote it, people. I sat my parents down and made them watch it. My dad doesn't like the franchise and he enjoyed it. So that says something.
Cool.
So without it being in the, what as far as Vince, the director, is concerned, is your schedule open? What do you have going on right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the meantime, obviously I'm busy with this, with the Blu-rays and stuff like that. I want to let people know, if backers are watching, that, there's a lot. I mean, all this stuff right here was like, it's all things to do that I have to get done.
Still.
A lot of it's done, actually. There's a lot of check marks up here.
Okay.
We're checking things off left and right. A lot of the stuff is done. Right now, the final piece is, in fact, wait a second. If I search around, give me 1 second.
Okay. Sorry, guys, in the chat. Cody, hello, Mother Mayhem.
So things like the script have come in.
Ooh.
So, yeah, you get like all that stuff. There's even hold on really quick. the map how to find Crystal Lake in the back.
Exclusive.
Yeah, so that's ready. I mean, the posters are here. The soundtrack is on its way. In fact, I have the backing of the soundtrack pieces because we had to sign them. I got to meet with the composer and have him sign the back as well. And those are going to be laid underneath the CD. So the soundtracks are almost done. The VHSs are in the art phase. We have somebody custom designing art. What we had on the website was like a pretty good indication of where we'd probably go, but it's going to go further than that. And we listened to the fans as far as what they wanted for design, what type of design they like better than the other stuff. So we made some switches and things like that. But the artwork is basically all done. It's just the behind the scenes. And as soon as I finish that up in about a month and a half, we'll start the production process. I will receive all 1,800 Blu-rays, and I will sit here in this office and I will fill every single, like all 1,500 orders, one by one. And that will take a little bit. And in the meantime, like I'm working, like you were kind of talking about it before. I've been hired as a second AD on a show right now. I've been doing all sorts of, set work since the end of Never Hike Alone just to make a living and pay my bills. Mm-hmm. From a directorial standpoint, I directed a film called Imagine. It's a short film that's been going around festivals that just did really well at Crypticon Seattle and another festival in Idaho. It's going to be going to more festivals throughout the year. I did another film just recently as a part of, we're calling it 3 Days with Venice. And a friend of mine, Ben, who was one of the cameramen on Never Hike Alone, was given an opportunity to shoot with a new camera called the Sony Venice, which is yet to be released. It's their new cinema camera. And so we did 3 days, 3 shorts. And so I did a short, he did a short, his brother did a short. And it's part of his ongoing series called Last Broadcast, which picks up with characters in a post-apocalyptic world. Not so much Mad Maxy, because we don't have that budget, but in a world that's kind of like collapsed. And, it's these stories of people that are trying to survive in certain circumstances. And then it's paired with one of the last broadcasts from around the world of somebody like either sending out a message on the radio or leaving a podcast or doing something, just saying like, listen, this is the last time I'm going to be able to say anything. This is my message. And the message within their message correlates with what you see visually going on, even though the two characters aren't related. And so it's kind of a cool filmmaking challenge. And what we got to do with the Venice is it has these cool features where it doesn't just shoot one way. You can shoot 3:2, which is IMAX style, which is the one that I did. And then Ben shot with anamorphic lenses. So it's like 177 Hateful Eight style. And then his brother did one that's more traditional 1980 by 1020, but shot with anamorphic lenses. We partnered with Able Cine LA, so the Sony Venice camera, Tokina Vista lenses, which I shot at. They lent us this stuff for free so we could shoot and do a review of it. And then they shot with Orion anamorphics. So I think it's Atlas Lens Co. Orion anamorphic lenses. And it was just cool to shoot with, you're talking about the stuff we shot Never Hike Alone with. This is now kind of that higher feature level. And then Womp Stomp is producing a new film called Pathosis, which will be directed by Austin Bonang. He's a previs artist who's worked at a company called The Third Floor for, I want to say, the last 10 to 12 years. He's worked on X-Men, Godzilla. He's working on the new Avatar right now. He's, a fantastic filmmaker, and we're going to give him his opportunity to do his first short. And again, knocking up the production value, showing that we have the ability to create feature level production value for a much lower cost, and think outside the box as filmmakers, as low budget filmmakers. And of course, we also have our next fan film coming out that we've co-produced with, Renee Rivas, The Spirit of Haddonfield, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, somebody in the chat just brought up that apparently you're playing Michael Myers in that.
That is correct.
Okay, wow, look at you, multi franchise here.
I think that's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun because Renee was a big help with Never Hike Alone. The scene where we shot the head crush scene was shot in Arizona, and that's where my brother lives, but that's also where Renee was from. And I met Renee when I went to go visit my brother, because he wrote me as a fan way early on in the process of Never Hike Alone. It was like, man, like I've always wanted to do that. I would love to do that one day. And I was like, well, why don't you, let's, like, my brother lives out there. We should grab coffee. So we grabbed coffee. I ended up helping him get involved with the Friday the 13th Part 3, the Memoriam documentary. He ended up doing additional photography for them. In fact, in the opening sequences of that documentary, if you watched it, there's shots of like Jason standing in the woods and standing in the water. That's Renee in costume, me shooting him. So we were able to kind of contribute to that project. We started working together. And then when I started putting together the production for the head crush scene, we ran into this problem where if we tried to shoot it in California, we would have had to pay for a scuba diver, a lifeguard, permits, and all these different safety precautions. And I was like, dude, I'm literally standing in knee deep of water and jumping out. Why do I need a lifeguard? And when we went and shot that scene for the documentary, I mean, Renee got dressed in a Jason costume and walked into Lake Mary. Mm-hmm. Nobody called the cops. Nobody asked for a permit. Nobody gave a flying crap. Mm-hmm. So I was like, wait a second. Like, we can either go through all the problems to shoot this in LA, or I can spend 2 extra things of gas each way.
Guerrilla style. Yeah.
And guerrilla style this thing out in Lake Mary. So let's do that. So, Renee ended up becoming our point person on that, ended up earning himself an associate producer credit. And as we were wrapping up, one day he pulled me aside and was like, hey, I have an idea for a Halloween fan film. Would you help me? And I'm like, hell yeah, I'd help you, man. What do you want me to do? And he's like, would you play Myers? And I'm like, yeah. So you mean I just get to be in costume and I don't have to do anything else? He's like, nah. And I was like, that sounds like a plan to me. And it kind of gave me that opportunity I didn't really get on Never Hike Alone, to like just focus on being the character the entire time. Mm-hmm. And I did help with some production stuff. Like, we ended up recruiting a good effects artist for him, Lily. And help him put some pieces together for it. But ultimately, like, this is his production, and we went out to assist him, and we filmed it, one weekend over Halloween, and then a couple months later we went back and finished it. And so it's done. We're working on a trailer right now. In fact, it releases next Monday. Okay. Monday the 9th. The first real trailer for Spirit of Haddonfield will be released.
Where can they see that?
That will be on Renee Rivas's YouTube channel, Renee Rivas Productions. It will also be on the Spirit of Haddonfield Facebook page, which you should join it if you haven't already, and you should follow Renee on YouTube if you haven't already, along with Womp Stomp Films. Okay. And then we'll spread it out through our social media. I mean, you won't be able to miss it. If you're following either one of us, we're going to release it and make sure that it gets out there to the public.
So going back to you, how do people follow you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram?
Everything's Womp Stomp Films, and if you have any trouble spelling that, it's WOMPSTOMPFILMS, and it's at that. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all there. WompStompFilms.com. That has links to all of our social media pages. Same thing on YouTube. It's /WompStompFilms. Like, subscribe, and follow us, because we're going to be releasing some cool news. We have actually some pretty exciting announcements coming up in the next few weeks. A little bit more details about Pathosis, a little bit more what's going on with Spirit of Haddonfield, and a couple other projects that we've been involved with. And then like, as far as me personally, like, Never Hike Alone has opened up a few opportunities for me to go in and interview for directorship on certain projects. Nothing is finalized. Nothing's been there. And I'm also writing with my writing partner from Never Hike Alone, Nate McLeod. So if you want to understand where the name Kyle came from, Kyle McLeod, it's Kyle Klein, our producer, and Nate McLeod, our writer. I just squashed their names together. And I was like, Kyle McLeod, that's a cool name. So I'm working with Nate on a new script that, you meet with people and they go, well, it's cool that you did this Friday the 13th thing and you were able to kind of piggyback off of Jason Voorhees being a known entity, but what can you do with it, your own original property? Mm-hmm. And so the challenge that has been presented to me as a filmmaker is go write something original and something that doesn't rely on previous canon from other films. And I was like, I'm perfectly happy to do that. Like, I was doing that and nobody would read my stuff. So now that you're willing to read it, I'm happy to go out and write it. So I've been working on that, which is its own process in between everything else that's going on. So we're just chipping away at that. And, hopefully in a couple of months, we're able to get that script out there and get a few studios interested in it. And, we'll see where the chips land.
Great. Let me just double check the chat really quick and then I'll let you go. I know you have somewhere to be. Everybody's saying this is great. Thank you for doing this. That's a very common theme.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I love sitting down and chatting and talking Friday. And, it's like, you don't usually get to nerd out with people in day-to-day life. It's not like you sit down at like Starbucks and you go, hey, you watch Friday the 13th? You want to talk about this for like 2 hours?
Yeah. This was a glorified date for me. I don't care who says what. So we touched on that. Have studios, I think you kind of said it. Has anybody come to you since this film with any sort of offers, or has your life changed at all thanks to Never Hike Alone?
Well, yeah, I could answer that question in a different way, because yes, okay, it has changed the way that I've been able to pursue my career. It's definitely opened up some doors. It's not a guarantee. The doors just open now, and now I have to build the proper materials to walk through those doors. So that means writing a script. That means going and consulting and interviewing and doing everything that it takes. Those were opportunities that weren't being afforded to before Never Hike Alone, but it didn't guarantee that, all right, kid, you did Never Hike Alone. Now you can go do the next Godzilla movie, which, hey, I'm ready to do that if they want. And Toho, I want to be hired by Toho. Like Legendary, that's awesome, but I'd rather go make a Japanese Godzilla. So there's that. And the way that it's ultimately changed my life, I think I think has been more impactful, is the fact that, like, before this, I didn't know any of the Friday the 13th alumni. I barely had the courage to go and speak to Tom Matthews at a convention maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't know what to say to him other than like just repeating over and over again that you're my hero. So now it's like, now I text Tom like every couple of weeks for updates and talk to him and go get lunch with him. And he's introduced me to Tom McLaughlin and CJ Graham. And, when I bump into people at conventions and they know what Never Hike Alone is, it's humbling. You know what I mean? It's like, I didn't set out to do this for anything other than I wanted to work on a Friday the 13th film for at least once in my life. Mm-hmm. And what I've been afforded is this great opportunity where it's connected me with fans all around the world, in Mexico, in France, in Finland, in Norway, in Asia. And it's amazing the messages that come across my screen. And, I become completely humbled to see, people write me and say, now I want to do my own fan film. Like, it's like, wow, like, it's a cool feeling. I mean, that's how it's changed. It's changed from a thing of like, I've worked in film for about 10 years. I've worked on a lot of films, been involved in the creative process and done a lot of stuff, but no one ever writes me and says, hey, great work coordinating on Freebirds. You know what I mean? And very rarely do the other films I've worked on carry over. But there's something about Jason Voorhees. There's something about that connects us all to Jason Voorhees. And talking to one of the other alumni, he's super funny. And he was just telling me about, like, I've done all these films and I've done all these different things. He's like, I've been in all these shows and all these movies, but the only one I still get letters about is Friday the 13th. And I wasn't even the main character. And mm-hmm. I was like, that's funny. You know what I mean? And I don't want to give it away because this person may or may not be involved with Never Hike Alone too.
Hey, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
So yeah, and it's, like, getting to know people like Deborah Voorhees and, chatting with Adam Marcus. She's phenomenal. Bumping into Derek Mears at a convention and having a long conversation with him because he knew what it was. Bumping into Douglas Tate, having the same conversation, and like, having him say, like, I can't believe you guys did it. Like, congratulations. Kane, it afforded me an opportunity to go work on the Friday the 13th game. And that was before the movie even came out. They invited me down and I got to design a kill and go work with Kane.
I'm sorry. Let me interrupt really quick. I meant to ask you the timeline when Tom Matthews was working on the game. Was that before or after you got him involved in Never Hike Alone?
He was working on the game before he got involved with Never Hike Alone. He did that first.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And in fact, the first time I sat down with him, the first thing I told him, I was like, I'm so happy that you were in the game. Thank you for coming back and doing that. And here's another way that I think you can invigorate fans. And so, like, the guys definitely get credit for bringing, the guys at the game definitely get credit for bringing back Tommy first. And then we brought him back on screen. Mm-hmm. So there was that. I mean, I did a podcast not too long ago, and I got to talk with Jason Parker from Friday the 13th franchise and Pete from Crystal Lake Memories, Peter M. Peter Racky. And so, like, getting a chance to just talk with them and them acknowledging that they know what Never Hike Alone is. It's it's a different experience, you know, because it's always like, as a fan, it's always a one-way, you know, reciprocation. You know what I mean? It's always you walking up to your heroes and saying, thank you for everything that you've done. And to have that bounce back, be like, hey, you know, thank you for inspiring me. And they go, wait, you did Never Hike Alone? Oh my God, that was so great. Thank you for keeping the franchise alive. It's like, whoa, like now I kind of feel like I got my own little small piece of it. And I think that as a fan,
it's a big piece.
Oh,
it's worth 30 years as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thank you. You know, and so it's stuff like that, you know, it's like, that isn't, you never imagine that that's what's going to come out of doing a fan film, because usually the typical response when you say, hey, I'm going to go work on a fan film is,
yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
You know what I mean?
That sounds exciting. Sure.
Yeah, no, good for you. You know what I mean? And it's like, you know, a little pat in the head, and then a like, what a nutbag. You know what I mean? So,
oh, you don't have any sound equipment. That's completely normal. Okay.
Yeah, this is all good. You know, and that was, you know, so that experience, this whole experience of turning it around, and you going to Telluride. You know what I mean? Like, having a fan film be in the opening night selection of the Telluride horror show, you know, I was completely like, you know, I was downplaying it, because I was like, I don't understand why this is happening. And it wasn't until, you know, the last night that I was there that I was like kind of catching up with some of the moderators of the festival. And, you know, I just went up and I was just like, you know, guys, thank you for including me in this, because this is a festival where like The Endless was playing, Mayhem, Jungle, and Victor Crowley, the new Victor Crowley movie, like all these movies that are established by established directors and people who have like real careers and are really going after stuff. And to include a fan film in this, like, I can't thank you guys enough. And they sat me down and were like, listen, like, we didn't just bring this in because it was a fan film or because it was Friday the 13th. It's like, we looked at like thousands and thousands of films this year, and we picked yours for a very specific reason, because we believed in it and we thought it belonged here. So take that into consideration when you're thinking about, you know, the way this film is perceived, because this is the way we see it. It's not just a fan film. You did something a little bit beyond that. And so it's from that conversation that I've now kind of stepped back and started to realize the responsibility of what the film is now doing for people, and what it's doing for fans of the franchise, what it's doing for future filmmakers, and how they approach their films, and how they can achieve higher level of production value if, you know, they kind of take our advice and stuff like that. You know, like I was talking about Jeremy Brown before, like, he wrote me a message and said, listen, I'm making this film. I want you to come out and help us. You know, getting flown out to Idaho to go help another fan make their film and see their dream come true. So, you know, there's a little bit of a responsibility that comes with it. And, you know, it's something I'm more than willing to take on, and proud to be a part of, you know, to be considered a part of the franchise as some fans have considered it. It's a great honor. And I can't think of anything else more that I would want. You know, like I said, we didn't get paid for this. We didn't make any money off of this, but what we did get from it has made the entire experience worth it.
Well, yeah, we'll call you the unofficial ambassador of Friday the 13th. If people want to see it on the big screen, I know it's not everywhere. How do you have dates that you could plug?
I do. On Friday the 13th coming up, we have 2 screenings. In fact, let me get the information for you right now. I guess maybe I should have had this previously prepared, but
while you're looking that up, is it presented in flat or scope? Because I know it's
scope.
230 scope. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty scope. So we have one coming up in Seattle at the Vashon Theater, 9:30 p.m. If you look that up, so Vashon is like an island just outside of Seattle, and the good backer of ours and supporter Joseph Atkinson is putting that one on. So fans have contacted us, just so you know. Any fan can contact me and say, hey, I know a theater that will play your film if we rent it out for X amount of money or do this. And if a fan is willing to go and book the theater, we will ship you the DVD, or the Blu-ray, or we'll ship you a hard drive, whatever you need to put on that, as long as you can somehow either make it free admission or donate all your admission money to some type of charity, we're willing to hook that up. And that's what Joseph's doing. I mean, he's got awesome. free admission, starts at 9:30 p.m. And then there's also another one coming up soon at, it's going to be our Toronto premiere, so our Canadian premiere at Eyesore Cinema. That's in Toronto, Canada, on Bloor Street, and that's going to be an 8 p.m. showtime. That's again Friday the 13th. We just announced this morning we're going to be part of Scares That Care weekend in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Yeah.
And shout out to Mike Lombardo for getting that hooked up. He's the director of Dreaming of a White Doomsday, which has been making its rounds in the festival circuit lately. They're putting that on, and that's a charity event that helps support families that are dealing with medical issues that can't quite pay their bills because of what's going on. So this, we're very proud to be a part of that. In August 24th through the 26th, I believe, is Horror Hound Indianapolis. Never Hike Alone will be screening there as part of the film festival, and I will be there in person. So we'll be doing that. I'm hoping to drive out to, it won't be screening there, but I'm hoping to drive out to Mad Monster in a couple of weeks. Tom's going to be there along with a couple other Friday the 13th and 11th.
Oh, in Arizona, right?
Yep, in Arizona. So I'll be kicking around at that. And then we still have about 6 to 8 film festivals we're waiting to hear back from. So, I mean, like I said, our goal is to, film Never Hike Alone in every single state, or show Never Hike Alone in every single state. So if you're a fan and you want to put on a screening, just contact us at contact@wompstompfilms.com. Say, hey, I might have a place for you, and we'll work out the logistics with you to get you a DVD or a Blu-ray or whatever else you need to play it and set up a night. We had another fan, Joe Gallo, who did a double feature, which was a good way to do it. He paid for the rights to screen Friday the 13th, Jason Lives, and then played Never Hike Alone right after it. So it was kind of like a two-hander. And they had that was one of the best nights. I mean, it was him, Emily Lane, the folks at, I'm trying to remember the name of the cinema. Can't think of it right now, but I'm sure Joe will yell at me later for forgetting. But they had a great night. I mean, they did a costume contest. We worked it out. So I sent them some posters that were signed and some photos that were signed. So there was a raffle. And it's just really fun events. You know what I mean? I've always been a big fan of going to marathon events. I won my Blu-ray box set there, at a full date, like 1 through 8, all night, like it started in the afternoon and ended the next morning. Yeah. So, anytime we can be a part of those, like sneak us in, we're only 53 minutes. So we fit right in, don't have to wait the whole hour and a half. So there's that. And then, as soon as we get new bookings or we have any other screenings pop up, it will definitely get posted to our Facebook. It will definitely get posted to our Instagram, and you shouldn't be able to miss it.
Well, Vince, on behalf of Friday the 13th fans everywhere, on behalf of everybody in the chat, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for making Never Hike Alone. And if whatever help you need moving forward with the sequel, please don't hesitate. I'll be a PA if you need. Just let us know how we could. Well, everybody in the chat, everybody watching, Womp Stomp Films, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, right?
Yep.
And it's wompstompfilms.com.
Yep. And you'll be able to access everything from there. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube and share this film. Friday the 13th is coming up. Perfect time to share it with your friends who haven't seen it. It's a perfect excuse to watch it. And just teasing it now, we got a pretty cool and exciting piece of news to release on Friday the 13th. It might get released before then. I'm not sure because there's other things going on. So we don't know when the actual release is going to be. But coming towards Friday the 13th, we got a really cool thing that we think fans are going to really dig.
Great. Thank you once again, Vincent. Do you have any final words for the audience?
No, just, thank you. Anybody who has watched the film, anybody who shared the film, commented, liked us, followed us. Thank you for the support. It means the world to our team. And we're glad that we were able to make a bunch of Friday the 13th fans happy because it's been a while. So to see smiles on faces is kind of a good change of pace, rather than the frumpy grounds that we're all used to.
Yeah, it's been pretty dismal times, especially.
Yeah. And I would just say that, don't worry. Somebody's going to figure something out. There's going to be another Friday the 13th someday. And in the meantime,
there is one. It's yours.
Well, but there's also more coming out. There's more fans working on theirs. There's Voorhees, there's Mythos, there's, like I said, the Slash and Cast guys and everybody else who's, working on their films. Best of luck to you guys. It's now your turn to carry the torch this year, because I don't have time to make Never Hike Alone 2, and I don't have the money right now. So we really hope that you guys enjoy those films, and that if the studios aren't willing to carry Jason on their shoulders, well, the fans are going to do it. And it's up to you guys. And it's CP, thank you for inviting me out here and for running your podcast and for being such a big fan and spreading the good word on Friday the 13th.
Whatever I can do. Whatever I
Yeah,
can
man,
do.
it's this all comes down to a collective fan effort. And, our film was funded by fans. It was supported by fans. And, without that collective unit of Friday the 13th fandom, none of this would exist.
All right, that'll do it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.